Chapter 1658. She did not expect him to agree so readily. Amo's expression went blank for a moment. He paused for a moment before saying, "Oh, okay." His voice was a little flat. When he said the last word, he finally raised his eyebrows a little, and there was a hint of joy in his voice. After the successful engagement on the high platform, Shunjuli and Imo each had a light red thin line on their wrists. It was like the red line of the moon god. When Shunjuli said, "I will cancel the engagement," the thin line automatically broke and flashed in the air and disappeared. Once this thing disappeared, their engagement was automatically cancelled. From then on, he would no longer be her fiancé, and he would have nothing to do with her. Imo looked at her wrists quietly. It was as smooth as before, and there was no longer anything that made her feel like she was imprisoned. This was also the result she wanted for more than a month. Now that she had succeeded, she felt that it was unreal. He should be relieved, he should be happy. But what the hell was that indescribable pain in the depths of his heart? Shunjuli turned and walked away. Although he had suffered such a big blow, his steps were still very steady, but his speed was slightly faster. His back looked a little bleak and lonely. It was a little painful to look at. Imo paused and added, "You can take Nianma with you." After all, he was his biological son. The child would have a brighter future with him. Shunjuli paused for a moment, but he did not turn around. He only responded with a faint okay, and added, "Where is he? I will take him with me." Amo's expression changed. "He is not with you?" Shunjuli suddenly turned around and looked at her face. "Is he not with you?" Imo was speechless. Imo Palace was in a state of chaos like never before. Everyone was mobilized to search for a child, turning the sky upside down. No, no, no. They had searched everywhere, even snake holes and rat nests, but they still couldn't find the little ancestor. It was as if the little fellow had disappeared from the face of the earth. No one knew where he was. Imo pursed her lips tightly. She used all kinds of spells to search, but to no avail. Her face was getting paler and paler, and her heart was beating faster and faster. Although the little guy was smart, he was still a child who had only been born for a little over a month. Who would take him if he got lost? Little Nianma's shadow flashed in her mind. His big eyes that longed for affection flashed by, and the last scene when she saw him flashed by. "All right, I'm going to see your father and treat him. I can't disturb him. Go play in the garden first. Mother will find you later." "Sure. Mother, you must cure father. Father will definitely be very happy. Don't be long-winded, go." Then he ran away. That little fellow had always hoped that his mother and father would love each other. Since he was young, he had been trying his best to bring them together. Every time he begged her to save his father, he would try to please her and be obedient. When he heard that she would save his father, he was so happy that his eyes were as bright as the stars. When he ran away, his footsteps were very happy. At that time, his little heart must have been jumping with joy. He must have been waiting for her in the garden yesterday, waiting for her good news. He must have been waiting for her to say that his father had been cured. Chapter 1659. He was an impatient child, so he must be waiting anxiously for her. Imo could almost see the way the child was eagerly waiting for her. Her heart felt like a pot of boiling water was boiling in her heart. She did not feel anything when the child was around, but now that he was missing, she knew that the world was falling apart. Her brain was buzzing, and her hands and feet were cold. All kinds of images of the child being kidnapped and abused flashed through her mind. She saw him begging on the street with broken arms and legs, having his organs dug out and sold, and being sold to remote mountains. She did not know where these images came from. The more she thought about it, the more panicked she became. She seemed to hear little Nianma crying for his parents. Her heart was in pain, as if it was being squeezed by an invisible hand. It was so tight that she could not breathe. "Nianma, Nianma, nothing must happen to you." Her footsteps were getting more and more hurried. She went to the garden, the study room, and the bedroom. Gu Shijio had checked every single place that little Nianma frequented, but she could not find any trace of him. People were like this. The more they could not find anything, the more they would want to search again and again. Although they knew that there was no result, they could not control their footsteps. She ran to the garden again. She had asked little Nianma to wait in the garden. The security of the Emo Palace was so tight, and little Nianma was harmless to anyone. How could he go missing? How could he go missing? She ran too fast and tripped on something. Suddenly, she staggered a few steps forward and directly fell into someone's arms. A faint fragrance like the Buddha lotus entered her nose. Amo's body stiffened, but the person had already held her and stepped back silently to keep a distance from her. Imo secretly took a breath and looked at the person who was checking something not far away. Did you find anything? Her voice was unconsciously trembling. No. Shunjuli only answered her with 2 words. His expression was very cold. It seemed that he treated her like a stranger after he broke off the engagement. Just now, when they were in a hurry to search, they met a few times. But he did not talk to her and just hurriedly passed by. Imo closed her eyes slightly and tried to calm herself down. She didn't say anything else and began to search the surroundings. Little Nianma was very active, and his scent was everywhere in the garden. Therefore, it was impossible to find him with just his scent alone. She could only make inferences based on what she knew and everything around her. She asked little Nianma to wait in the garden. Although the boy was naughty, he was a man of his words. Since he promised to wait here, he would wait in the garden. Even if she didn't get impatient, he could only run back to Shinjuli's courtyard to look for her and visit his father. According to the kid's patience, he could probably wait for 2 hours. Amo's gaze fell on Shinjuli. When did you leave Emo Palace? I didn't see him before I left Emo Palace. Midnight. I haven't, Shinjuli answered succinctly. Amo's heart sank. Shinjuli had left so late. Yet that little fellow had not come to his courtyard to look for him. This meant that something had happened to him long ago. His disappearance was most likely in the garden, or on the way to Shinjuli's courtyard. Regardless of whether it was in the garden or on the way, it was a very safe place. Logically speaking, it was impossible for him to be lost. Could it be that an outsider had sneaked in and kidnapped him? Chapter 1660. The garden was a forbidden area in the Emo Palace, and only a limited number of people came here. Other than the children, only butler Himu, Yi Tianli, and Shinjuli had been here before. Therefore the smell was not too complicated. Amo's sense of smell was not very sensitive, so she could only put her hope on Shinjuli, who was searching nearby. He was very careful, and did not miss a single leaf or bush. Amo organized her thoughts, and quickly told him what she knew. Shinjuli listened to her in silence. He only glanced at her. Although his eyes were calm, it was as cold as ice. It was as if he was condemning her. Since she had promised the child, why couldn't she see the child before she left? So that he did not have to wait. Imo felt a stab in her heart when he looked at her. She could not help but sneer. You are not qualified to condemn me. Don't worry about your son. If anything happens to him, you... At this point, her throat was blocked by a ball of cotton. She could not continue her sentence. If anything happened to little Nianma, she did not know how to forgive herself. Perhaps, she would not be able to forgive herself for the rest of her life. She had long thought that little Nianma should not be by her side. She would kill everyone she cared about. The more she cared about someone, the easier it was to lose them. It was not the first time that God had played her like this. She had wanted to push them away. She had pushed away everything that she cared about. Why did she have to bear the loss? Why? She did not know why. But the grievance in her heart was overwhelming. It made her nose sour and her throat tight. She stood in the same spot with her eyes lowered. Her fingers were cold, and suddenly her wrist tightened. Her small hand was held by someone. The big hand was warm, and completely covered her cold little hand. Don't be afraid. Nianma will be fine. The voice was as calm as usual. Imo suddenly raised her head, and looked into a pair of deep blue eyes. The eyes were as calm as water, but there was a kind of power that could calm people's hearts. It silently comforted her heart, which was already extremely panicked. At this moment, she was like a hedgehog that would prick anyone she saw. She looked extremely sharp, but in fact she was very afraid. She seemed to have experienced this feeling before, and it left a deep impression on her. She wished she could suppress it into the deepest recesses of her memory, never wanting to taste it again. But she didn't expect that she would experience it all over again. That feeling of hopelessness, helplessness, anxiety, and fear haunted her like a nightmare, making it hard for her to breathe. At this moment, she was no longer the high and mighty demon master, but a mother who had lost her child. She vaguely remembered how she felt when she had a miscarriage. She couldn't keep the thing she cared about the most. She could only watch it disappear. No one helped her. At that time, no one helped her. She prayed to all the gods and Buddhas, but no one extended a helping hand to her to save her child. Humans were like this. When they had once suffered a deep pain, both their body and heart would be extremely sensitive to this kind of pain. Once they suffered a similar kind of pain again, they would lose their minds. His behavior was far from his usual standard. Just like now, it was as if she had been sent into a nightmare that she could not wake up from. Her back was straight, but her little face was terrifyingly pale. She bit her lips so hard that she didn't even notice that the corner of her lips was bleeding. Her mind was blank, and she almost could not think. Her whole body was standing on the edge of a cliff, with one foot hanging in the air. It seemed that she would fall at any time. Suddenly, her body was pulled into a strong embrace, and a calm voice echoed in her ears. "Don't be afraid, Xiuma. Leave everything to me. I will find our child. Nianma will be fine." Chapter 1661. The embrace was familiar yet strange, with a slight warmth. Amo's body stiffened, but she did not react. He had already let go of her, and took a step back to look for clues. Imo stood in the same place. She could still feel the residual warmth of his embrace. The moment he let go of her, she felt cold, and her heart seemed to be empty. Of course, this feeling was only for a moment, and she quickly ignored it. It was a very short hug, but strangely it had a soothing effect. Her panicked heart finally calmed down a little. After thinking for a moment, she wanted to continue looking along the way. Shenjiuli, who was looking under a tree, suddenly picked up something from the grass on the ground and looked at it carefully under the sunlight. Imo instinctively felt that he had found something new. She could not help but move closer to him and look at his hand. It was a jade bead. It was very small and looked like one of the beads in a string. It was shining between Shenjiuli's two fingers. Imo had a very good memory. She immediately said, "This is the jade bead string on Yi Tianli's wrist." Shenjiuli glanced at her. She was very clear about the things that other men wore. However, this was not the time to look into these messy things. He put the bead near his nose and sniffed it. After a moment he said he was here yesterday. He could infer the time when the bead left the body based on the smell on it. He looked around and said, "Nianma's smell is the strongest here. There are no traces of a fight. If I am not wrong, Nianma was attacked from behind and taken away." Imo clenched her fingers and turned to leave without saying a word. She was going to cut Yi Tianli into pieces. When she was about to fly into the air, the directed audio spell suddenly lit up. She opened it and heard the report from General Manager He Mu. "Devil Master, the Celestial Emperor and hundreds of his subordinates are outside Mo Palace. They are asking to see you and Mr. He." What were they doing here? Imo was impatient. She was now in a hurry to find Yi Tianli and bring back the child. She did not have time to deal with the Celestial Emperor. She was about to say, "No time," when her little hand was suddenly held by someone. "Let's go and have a look." Shenjiuli had always been fast. While Imo was still in a daze, he had already flown out of the palace with Shenjiuli. Imo angrily said, "I'm not in the mood to look at them." He wanted to pull his hand away. However, what Shenjiuli said next made her stop in her tracks. "If I am not mistaken, Nianma is in their hands." Imo. Shenjiuli was a gentleman. He didn't take advantage of her. He let go of her hand and flew in front of her. "Let's go." With a gust of wind, she had already overtaken him, flying even faster than Shenjiuli. Shenjiuli breathed a sigh of relief as he watched her leave in a hurry. Mother and child were connected by heart. No matter what, she still cared about her child. As long as it was good that he still had something he cared about. A group of people stood outside the Mo Palace. After all, they were all celestial beings of different sizes. Their bodies were shining with auspicious lights that almost broke through the sky. The purpose of this group of people was unknown. The guards of the Emo Palace naturally did not dare to be careless. They lined up in a row to confront the people from the celestial world. Fortunately, the people from the celestial world did not intend to attack the Emo Palace. After the report, the celestial emperor and the others waited outside with their hands down. This made the guards of the Emo Palace feel relieved. When Imo and Shinjuli flew out, they saw this scene. As soon as Imo came out, the people of the Imo clan immediately knelt down. We pay our respects to the Devil Master. Imo waved her hand to signal them to get up. However, her eyes quickly swept across the celestial beings on the opposite side, but she did not see the child. Chapter 1662. The immortals were behaving strangely this time. In the past, they would kneel and kowtow whenever they saw her. Even the celestial emperor had to bow to her. Now the group of immortals only bowed to her collectively. As for the celestial emperor, he only bowed to her. Devil Master. Imo smiled. Once she calmed down, her reasoning ability was still very strong. She was too lazy to talk to the celestial emperor. She went straight to the point. Is Nyemo in your hands? Are you here to negotiate with me? The celestial emperor was stunned. He did not expect her to be so straightforward. After a short pause he replied, Devil Master, don't worry. Prince Nyema is very safe. Now no one in the Fanteon Palace dares to trouble him. The only thing he cares about now is his father. The Fanteon Palace? None of the people present were rookies, so they naturally knew where the Fanteon Palace was. According to legend, it was the place where the only Divine Lord used to live. It was located above the 36th level of the sky. Since the Divine Lord disappeared, the place was automatically sealed. No one had ever entered it. Of course, no one had the ability to enter it. Not even the Celestial Emperor. Now Shen Nianma could easily enter it. Was he the reincarnation of the Divine Lord? Or was he the descendant of the Divine Lord? Everyone's eyes were fixed on Shinjuli, who had not said a word since he appeared. If Shen Nianma was the son of God, then Shinjuli should be the Divine Lord. Everyone in the world knew that the Divine Lord and the Devil Lord were once enemies. A great war broke out between them. They were born to be enemies. The devils shouted and protected the Devil Master in the middle. Shinjuli was isolated. Countless swords and knives were aimed at Shinjuli. The immortals did not dare to show weakness. They immediately rushed forward and wanted to surround Shinjuli. Shinjuli didn't care about the demonic swords and sabers that were aimed at him. His face was gloomy as he looked at Heavenly Monarch's face and said indifferently, "You dare to plot against me?" His voice wasn't loud, but it was extremely intimidating, causing Heavenly Monarch's heart to turn cold. He slowly knelt down in front of Shinjuli. "I don't dare, I just want to verify. If I have offended you in any way, please punish me. Please return to your original position." The group of immortals behind him knelt down together. "Please return to your original position, Supreme Divinity." Their voices were like a landslide and a tsunami, extremely imposing. In these troubled times, the celestial realm was looking forward to the Supreme Divinity's return. Ever since the day of the Devil Lord's engagement banquet, the Sky Emperor had been suspicious of Shinjuli's identity. After returning, he tried to find out more about his background. The celestial realm was naturally very well informed. As long as he inquired seriously, he could still find many clues. He knew that Shinjuli had drifted out of the Fiery Gold Sea, and that no one had ever seen him before. The Fiery Gold Sea was a sea that even gods and ghosts couldn't get close to. No matter what fell into it, it would melt into dregs. Not even a molecule would be left behind. However, this person was able to come out of the Fiery Gold Sea alive. This could be considered a miracle. Hence, Heavenly Monarch's suspicions grew. He became more and more suspicious that Shinjuli was the Supreme Divinity. If the Supreme Divinity was reborn, it would naturally cause an uproar in heaven and earth. There would be countless auspicious signs, and the celestial realm would naturally know. However, what if the Supreme Divinity had never been immortalized? What if the Supreme Divinity had just left this continent? What if the Supreme Divinity had not been reborn, but had returned in a low-key manner? Naturally, there wouldn't be any strange signs on this continent. Chapter 1663. After figuring this out, The celestial thearch's heart felt as if it had been hooked by a small hook, scratching and scratching incessantly. He was even more convinced that Shinjuli was the Divine Lord, but he did not know why he was unwilling to admit it. Of course, to be on the safe side, he still wanted to verify it a few more times. He thought of the Fantion Palace, that only those with the bloodline of God could enter. He did not dare to provoke Shinjuli for the time being, so he turned his attention to Shin Yanma. Shin Yanma had been staying in the Mo Palace. The security there was very tight, and those who were not familiar with the terrain could not enter at all. Therefore, the Celestial Emperor sent someone to find Yi Tianli, who was drinking in a corner of the world, and told him his speculation. This matter involved the safety of the entire Celestial Kingdom. Yi Tianli did not dare to be dispirited at this moment. The Divine Lord and the Great Devil were natural enemies. If they were unintentionally together, the creatures in this world would be tortured again when they found out the truth. Even if the two of them did not fight, it would be inappropriate for the Divine Lord to stay in the Mo Palace. Moreover, there were too many variables. Besides, Shinjuli had robbed Yi Tianli of his marriage. Although Yi Tianli was willing to admit defeat, he still felt uncomfortable. He felt that his wife had been taken away from him. However, there was nothing he could do. If Shinjuli was really the Divine Lord, then the marriage between him and the Great Devil would obviously be impossible. How could a Divine Lord and a Divine Lord be a loving couple? Therefore, as long as he exposed Shinjuli's identity, Yi Tianli would indirectly take revenge. Yi Tianli still wanted to find out the truth. His mission was to steal the little bun Shen Nianma. Yi Tianli had been in the Mo Palace for nearly 2 years. Naturally, he was very familiar with the layout of the palace. His kung fu was very good, so it was easy for him to sneak into the Mo Palace to find an opportunity. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation in the Mo Palace. Both Mo and Shinjuli were highly skilled. Shin Nianma almost never left their hands. Yi Tianli had been hiding in the Mo Palace for a few days, but he still could not find a chance. Coincidentally, Shinjuli was injured and recuperating in the house yesterday. Mo had to leave as well, so Shin Nianma was left alone in the garden. Although Shin Nianma was different from the other children, he was not as alert as Yi Tianli. Therefore, there was no doubt that Yi Tianli would be able to attack him. Therefore, after Yi Tianli succeeded, he easily left Mo Palace and returned to the immortal world. Of course, Yi Tianli was very careful when it came to Shin Nianma. He only knocked him out and did not dare to hurt him. When Shen Nianma woke up from his coma, he found himself standing alone in front of a palace. The surroundings were quiet, and there were no onlookers around. Shin Nianma did not know what had happened. He looked at the palace in confusion, and vaguely felt that the palace was very familiar. The child was curious and playful, so he ran directly into the palace that no one else could enter. Of course, the Sky Emperor and Yi Tianli, who were hiding in the dark, saw everything clearly. At this time, the Sky Emperor and Yi Tianli basically had no doubts. Shinjuli, who suddenly appeared, was the legendary Divine Lord. The Divine Lord that they had been waiting for was already on this continent. He was also the fiancé of the Devil Lord. Since he was the Divine Lord, they naturally had to find a way to welcome him back. Of course, the little bun Shen Nianma had to be returned as soon as possible. Chapter 1664. After the first encounter, the Celestial Emperor and the rest knew that Shinjuli was not easy to talk to. If they did not send Shin Nianma back safely, he would immediately kill his way to the Celestial Kingdom. Therefore, the Celestial Emperor called for Shin Nianma to come out quickly and take him to find his father. However, he called for a long time, but there was no response from inside. The Celestial Emperor and the rest did not know how he was doing inside. After thinking of all kinds of ways to contact him, they finally heard Shin Nianma's faint crying. The little guy was calling for father and mother, and then he said that he could not find the way out. The Celestial Emperor and the rest of the Celestial Immortals could not enter, and the little bun could not get out. Both sides were anxious. The Celestial Emperor's original plan was quite good. He led a group of Celestial Immortals to the Mo Palace to pick up Shen Nianma. Even if the Divine Lord and the Great Devil were angry, they would not really punish them when they saw that the child was fine. He even thought of all kinds of words and made all kinds of preparations. He even specially picked an auspicious time. However, now that Shen Nianma was trapped in the Fantian Palace, the Celestial Emperor and the rest did not dare to delay too much. They immediately sent people to guard outside the Fantian Palace, to talk to the little guy inside, and calm him down. The Celestial Emperor led a group of officials to the Mo Palace to invite the Divine Lord. That was why the scene in the morning happened. The Celestial Emperor also went all out. He knelt in the dust and showed a posture of being ready to be punished. He briefly explained what happened. Shenjuli's face was pale. Since he came to this continent, there were always a variety of scattered images in his mind. They were all bits and pieces of the past on this continent. From then on, he knew that he used to belong to this world. He had always been a careful person. After a little inquiry on this continent, he knew the legend of the Celestial Devil. In his heart, he had already vaguely guessed who he was. He had always done things as he pleased. Even if he knew that he was probably the legendary Divine Lord, he did not intend to return to that position. He was Shenjuli now, and he would always be Shenjuli. He would never be the Divine Lord who was the enemy of the devil. He only wanted to get his woman back and live hand in hand with her in this world. As for the legendary Divine Lord who killed the devil and defended justice, who was kind to the world, fair, selfless, and merciful, what was that? Can it be eaten? What he did not expect was that the Celestial Emperor would use such a trick to force him to return to his position under the watchful eyes of the public. He even used little Nianma as a hostage. The Celestial Emperor probably thought that as a supreme divinity, he would have to take care of his own identity and would not punish the people who welcomed him back to the celestial world. That was why he was so humble and kneeling in the dust to admit his guilt. Moreover, he made such a scene and revealed his identity as the supreme god in front of everyone. Not to mention that Imo already disliked him. Even if he and Imo were in love now, after his identity was exposed, the demons of the devil realm would not allow him to stay in Mo Palace anymore. Who would be willing to let their enemies stay in their territory? At this moment, even if he did not admit his former identity, he was afraid that the people of the demon race would have scruples about him. The Heavenly Emperor really had a good plan. Shenjuli's eyes fell on the Celestial Emperor's head. His eyes were cold. Suddenly he curled his lips and smiled. Yun Lang, do you know what the punishment for scheming against the Supreme Divinity is? Yun Lang was the Dharma name of the Celestial Emperor of the Celestial Devil Continent. It was also his secular name. No one dared to call this name directly for many years. Unexpectedly, Shenjuli called it out so easily. The turning point was coming. Haha. Chapter 1665. The Celestial Thearch's body stiffened. He had no idea how the Supreme Divinity knew his real name. He lowered his head and said, I don't know. I did something wrong for the safety of the celestial realm and the Supreme Divinity. I'm willing to accept my punishment. His words were very eloquent. He humbly admitted his mistake and said that he did it for the greater good of the celestial realm. If Shenjuli was truly a benevolent god, he would not hold it against him. At most, he would reprimand him. Yes, your Majesty, you did it for the safety of the 6 realms. The Supreme Divinity is merciful and will forgive your Majesty. That's right. The Supreme Divinity is a benevolent god. He won't take offense to heart. The immortals had been in the celestial realm for many years. They were all old foxes. One by one, they began to praise Shenjuli. These people seemed to be flattering Shenjuli, but they were implying that Shenjuli should be merciful as a divine lord. He should be magnanimous and not be calculative. If he were to be calculative, he would lose his godhood. Shenjuli looked down at the rows of white poplar immortals kneeling on the ground. His lips curled up slightly. He did not say anything. Instead, he slowly walked toward the celestial arch. His aura made the kneeling immortals feel as if they were under heavy pressure. The celestial thearch's expression changed drastically. He felt that he was in big trouble. However, he had already accepted his punishment. He could not take it back now. All he could do was wait. The celestial thearch's heart almost jumped out of his chest when he saw the supreme divinity standing in front of him. The supreme divinity above his head spoke slowly. Those who go against the will of the celestial realm will either be caned 300 times or have their immortal power destroyed. Which one do you choose? The celestial thearch. As the supreme divinity of the celestial realm, he had to be beaten in public. The pain was one thing, but the humiliation was another. Supreme divinity is merciful. The celestial thearch's handsome face turned pale. That was the only thing left in his mind. Shenjuli said calmly, "It seems that you don't understand the word supreme divinity. Then I'll learn my lesson. You received 2 punishments." This sentence blocked all of the celestial emperor's paths of retreat. In the end, the celestial thearch chose the first option. Being caned 300 times was better than being crippled and becoming immortal, so he chose the first option. Shenjuli was still quite humane. He let him call the executioner from the celestial world to carry out the punishment. Of course, the other people in the celestial world and the devil crowd at the entrance of Emo Palace were the supervisors. Shenjuli did not stay to watch the execution. Before he left, he only said one sentence to the executioner: "Don't go easy on him, double the penalty." Then he glanced at the crowd around him and said, "Everyone, please be my witness." With Shenjuli's words, and the execution in front of so many people, even if the executioner was given 8 times the courage, he would not dare to go easy on the execution. It was only at this moment that the immortals finally understood that this supreme god was not a benevolent supreme god. He was a vengeful person who would never be provoked. The rumors were wrong. Shenjuli no longer cared about the celestial thearch who was being punished. He turned to look at Imo, who was surrounded by the devil crowd. Imo was also looking at him. Their eyes met, and Imo suddenly smiled. She smiled and said, "Congratulations." So he was her archenemy from tens of thousands of years ago. So they had always been enemies. Chapter 1666. Now that he had regained his identity, he wouldn't pester her anymore, right? Shenjuli's eyes darkened. He naturally understood what she meant by congratulations. His gaze fell on her, and then he reached out to her. "Imo, come with me to pick up the child." "Devil Master, don't." "Devil Master, you can't go." "Devil Master, this person has evil intentions and has been hiding in our Emo Palace. I'm afraid he's up to no good. I'm afraid it'll be disadvantageous for you if you go." The demons around her started to clamor. Gods and demons couldn't coexist, so immortals and demons naturally couldn't coexist either. Even if they were at peace, it was only on the surface. In fact, immortals and demons were very wary of each other. The demons deeply believed that these immortals were definitely up to no good. The demons surrounded Imo like a tide, afraid that she would fall into Shenjuli's trap. Although Shenjuli had publicly punished the celestial emperor, who knew if this wasn't a trick they had planned? Their goal was to trick the devil master, who had finally returned, into their trap. Therefore, they definitely couldn't let the devil master fall into their trap. The demons were all furious, and head steward Himu was the most furious of them all. He regretted it. Extremely regretful. This Shenjuli was obviously not an ordinary person. His martial arts were profound and unfathomable. Even if he didn't speak, he still had an aura that made it hard for people to breathe. With such obvious characteristics, he didn't expect him to be a supreme divinity. He allowed him to stay by the devil master's side, and even sympathized with him when he occasionally saw him suffer in front of the devil master. Now, it seemed that he was really blind. The devil master was still wise. Even if he didn't know the other party's identity, he wasn't moved by his actions and still treated him coldly like an enemy. The devil master was wise. He was really too wise. Head steward Himu snorted on the side and said with a fake smile, "Divine Lord, your thoughts are indeed unpredictable. You're actually willing to lower yourself in our Emo Palace. Please forgive us if we've neglected you these days. Now that Supreme Divinity has revealed your identity, please return to your Fanteon Palace." Shenjuli ignored him. Shenjuli had always been able to ignore people who had nothing to do with him. He kept looking at Imo. "What? You don't dare?" Head steward Himu immediately said, "Devil Master, he's trying to goad you. You're wise, you definitely won't fall for his trick." It was not easy for the devil race to be able to hold their heads high today, and it was all thanks to the Devil Lord holding the fort in the devil race. If anything were to happen to the Devil Lord, the devil race would most likely be driven to the barren lands of this continent. Thus, for the sake of the demon realm's safety, Manager Himu threw caution to the wind. He was certain that the Devil Lord would not be fooled, but he did not expect IMO to flick his sleeves and push away the demons around him. He walked step by step towards Shenjuli. "Butler Himu. Demon Master. Himu, there's no need for you to say anything else. I'll be right back." Amo's words sealed the situation, causing all the devils to shut their mouths instantly. IMO didn't hold Shenjuli's hand. Instead, he brushed past him and said, "Let's go." The two of them left side by side, leaving behind a group of immortals and devils staring at each other. Shui Ilan slowly walked out from behind the door. He looked at the two figures flying into the air in a slight daze. Although IMO had become much more taciturn, her most basic personality hadn't changed. She did things straightforwardly. Once she decided to do something, she didn't hesitate or overthink. No one could influence her. He just didn't know what kind of development would happen between her and Shinjuli after she left. Or would she just want to see the child? Chapter 1667. The Fanteon Palace was located on the 36th level of the sky. Outside the Fanteon Palace, Yi Tianli stood there and talked to Shen Nianma from time to time. At first, Shen Nianma replied to him, but he suddenly screamed and stopped talking. Yi Tianli's heart almost jumped out of his chest. If anything happened to the little brat in there, he would not be able to pay for it even if he had 8 lives. Not to mention that Shinjuli would not forgive him when he returned to his position. Even IMO would not let him go. He used to be the most powerful person in the 6 realms, but that was excluding the Divine Lord and the Great Devil. In front of these two people, he was nothing but a weakling. He could only be tortured. It was already difficult for him to deal with one of them. If these two great gods were to fight him at the same time, he did not even dare to imagine how he would die. In order to get in touch with Shen Nianma, he almost used up all his strength. He used all kinds of spells to see what was going on inside. However, there was no movement inside. It seemed that the little guy had an accident. Although the Fanteon Palace was the old residence of the Divine Lord, it had been uninhabited for tens of thousands of years. No one knew what was inside. If a child like Shen Nianma encountered something strange and mysterious in there, he was not even qualified to fight with him. When Shenjuli and IMO arrived, Yi Tianli was anxiously pacing around outside. He was almost going crazy. When he saw the two of them together, Yi Tianli's face suddenly turned pale. He braced himself to go forward and bowed. He braced himself and quickly explained the situation inside. Shenjuli did not pay attention to him at all. He immediately rushed into the palace without waiting for him to finish. The palace gate, which was regarded as a natural barrier by many immortals, was nothing to him. Seeing this, Yi Tianli could not help but sigh. At first, he still had a little hope that Shenjuli was not the Divine Lord, but that Shen Nianma was the reincarnation of the Divine Lord. Now that he saw Shenjuli rushing in as if it was his own house, what else could he say? The other party was definitely the Divine Lord. Sure enough, Yi Tianli could not help but look towards IMO. IMO stood outside the palace gates and stared at the palace gates in a daze. She vaguely felt that the palace gates looked very familiar. She didn't follow Shenjuli into the palace, because she knew that if Shenjuli didn't open the palace gates, an outsider like her wouldn't be able to enter. Shenjuli was probably concerned about the children who were trapped inside, so he rushed in directly. IMO. Yi Tianli actually had the urge to take the opportunity to run away. However, he also knew that the monk could run away, but the temple could not. If he were to run away now, Shenjuli and the other person would definitely not spare him. At that time, he would die even more miserably. Therefore, he could only bite the bullet and try to get close to IMO. After all, he had been with her for nearly 2 years. Even if there was no love, there was still friendship. For the sake of these 2 years of friendship, He hoped that Imo would put in a good word for him. Imo finally turned around to look at him. She looked him up and down and suddenly smiled sweetly. Her smile made Yi Tianli absent-minded for a moment. He only felt that her smile was as if there were flowers flying from the sky. However, what she said next made Yi Tianli feel as if he had been hit by a stick. Yi Tianli, which hand did you use to carry little Nianma? This sentence was obviously malicious. Yi Tianli's face changed, and he took a step back. Imo. Imo still looked at him with a smile. Chapter 1668. Imo was still looking at him with a smile, but her eyes were already looking at his 2 arms. Or should I say, you used both of your hands? She stretched out her small hand, and the Zhutian sword slowly appeared in her palm. Yi Tianli had goosebumps all over his body. His face was pale. Imo. I did not mean to hurt Nianma. Imo's voice was cold. If you wanted to hurt him, do you think you can still live? How dare he kidnap someone in her palace? He even took away her most precious baby. She pointed the tip of the sword at Yi Tianli. My patience is limited. If you don't answer me, I have to choose myself. If she let him choose, he would not be able to keep both of his arms. Yi Tianli knew that he could not escape today, so he had to stretch out his right arm. Use it. As soon as he said the word, a gust of wind swept past, and he suddenly felt a sharp pain in his arm. He opened his eyes with sweat all over his forehead, and saw that half of his right arm was gone. It was not cut off but vaporized. Blood gushed out from the wound, and Yi Tianli's forehead instantly broke out in cold sweat. The pain from the Zhutian sword was excruciating. He raised his hand to seal the acupoints to stop the bleeding, but the pain almost made him unable to stand. He looked at Imo with a pale face. He could not believe that she would treat him so coldly. Imo, you are so cruel, he whispered. A demon was a demon. No matter how good he used to be to her, as long as he let her down once, he would suffer the most tragic revenge. Although only one of his arms was cut off, the wound from the Zhutian sword was not something he could withstand. Without the antidote, he would not be able to live for more than 3 days. He was also arrogant, so he did not want to beg her again. He smiled sadly. Imo, take care. He turned and was about to leave. Suddenly, a small green bottle flew to his feet, and Imo's voice came from behind him. This is the antidote. Yi Tianli was stunned and subconsciously grabbed the antidote bottle. He held it tightly in his hand, and looked at Imo with a complicated expression. Imo. Imo only replied with one word. Go away. Yi Tianli did not dare to say anything else. He hurriedly grabbed the bottle of antidote, bowed his head and thanked her. Then he staggered away. Imo looked at the tip of the sword that was still dripping with blood. His eyes flickered slightly, but no one knew what he was thinking. Mother. A small figure rushed out and hugged her leg. Imo sheathed his sword, and looked at the little girl at his feet. Her cheeks were rosy and her eyes were watery. It was obvious that she hadn't suffered much. Imo finally breathed a sigh of relief. She bent over and picked him up, rubbing his head and feet to make sure there were no external or internal injuries. She was still a little puzzled. You look pretty good. Why didn't you answer the person outside who was screaming for you? Shin Nianma snorted. He is the bad guy who kidnapped Nianma. I just won't say anything. I just want him to be anxious outside. Imo. The little guy was already so scheming at such a young age. Imo couldn't bear to let go of the baby in his arms. The baby was so soft and tender in his arms that Imo couldn't bear to let go. But so what if he couldn't bear it? What was not hers would not be hers after all. She looked up and saw Shen Juli leaning against the palace door. His eyes were unpredictable in looking at her. There seemed to be gentleness at the bottom of his eyes. The wind blew his clothes and set off the vermilion palace door behind him. It was like a painting. Imo's heart skipped a beat and looked away. Chapter 1669. Now that she had seen the child and knew that he was indeed unharmed, she was relieved. It was time for her to go back to her own place. Although she thought so, she could not bear to leave the little baby in her arms. Shen Nianma did not know what she was thinking. He hugged her neck and felt wronged. Mother, why didn't you come to see me yesterday? I was waiting there for you. I wanted to go back to see you. But I was afraid that you would say that I did not keep my promise. In the end, I was caught by someone. Imo still felt guilty about this. She could not help but kiss him on his little face. Nienma, you are such a good boy. It is all my fault. I did not keep my promise and caused you to be arrested. She took out a toy that was difficult to understand and put it in Nienma's hand. Here, this is for you. Shin Nienma smiled. This is the first time that mother has given me a toy. Logically speaking, a child at this age should play with a rattledrum. However, this child was too smart. It was inappropriate to give him a rattledrum. For the past few days, she had been thinking of a gift for the child, but she could not find a suitable one. Later, she had an idea and made one herself. It was a very difficult Rubik's Cube toy. Even she did not expect to be able to make it. Little Nienma played with it for a while, and immediately fell in love with it. He played with it in her arms. Shen Julie's eyes were fixed on the mother and daughter. However, he did not come over. When Imo put the toy in little Nienma's hand, he seemed to have guessed something. He slowly walked over. Don't talk outside. Let's go in. Imo secretly took a breath. When she was about to give the child to him and leave, she heard Shin Julie's directed audio. I know that you want to leave, but the child has just been a little frightened. He has just seen you and is still in shock. Do you have the heart to leave him now? Imo was speechless. She looked at the child in her arms. His lips were red and his teeth were white. He did not look frightened at all. He was using the child to trick her again. Shin Julie sighed softly and continued without changing his expression. When I went in, his eyes were swollen from crying. He was curled up in a corner and trembling. I used my divine power to treat him and pacify his soul. Only then was he able to look much more normal. In fact, he is still very afraid. His words made Amo's heart ache. She could be cruel to anyone but little Nienma. While she was deep in thought, Shin Julie was already facing the child. Nienma, why don't you invite your mother in? Little Nienma did not know that his father had used him as a trump card. He immediately hugged his mother's neck and said, Mother, let's go in. The scenery inside is so beautiful. The palace is so big. And there are so many divine beasts. Mother will definitely like it when she sees it. Looking at little Nienma's bright eyes, Imo could not bear to leave him behind. Shin Julie seemed to know what she was worried about. Again he smiled and said, Don't worry. Our engagement has been cancelled. Are you still afraid that I will do something to you? I am a god after all. Imo glanced at him coldly and sent him a telepathic message. You're a fraud. She strode toward the door of the palace. She would go in. Who was afraid of who? She would go in to play with the child for a while and take a look at the layout of her palace. He had already seen everything in her Imo palace. It would be a waste if she did not take a look at it. Chapter 1670. Besides, Shin Julie was a god, and with little Nienma by his side, he would not do anything immoral. Moreover, her magical power was not to be trifled with. If he really dared to do anything to her, she definitely had the ability to destroy his Fanteon Palace. The gate of the Fanteon Palace was more like a wizardry barrier than a gate. Usually, only the Divine Lord and those who had the bloodline of the Divine Lord could freely enter and leave. Of course, if the Divine Lord wanted guests to enter, he would have to open the gate so that outsiders could enter. The Fanteon Palace had always been covered by a clear cover. Even if people stood in front of it, they could not see its full appearance. It was like a mirage. After Shen Julie opened the gate of the Fanteon Palace, the layer of the cover disappeared and finally revealed its true appearance. What majestic, what magnificent, what resplendent, what resplendent, what resplendent, what resplendent. None of these could describe the imposing manner of the Fanteon Palace. The only feeling it gave people was shock. It was like a wanderer struggling in the desert suddenly saw the most beautiful and eye-catching mirage. It made people want to worship this building when they saw it. Imo stood outside and looked at the Fanteon Palace a few times. She vaguely felt that it was familiar. Then, she looked at Shin Julie who was standing at the gate, and suddenly felt that this building was very compatible with this person. This building seemed to have become spiritual, and had become a spirit. The Divine Lord. Tens of thousands of years ago the archenemy. However, she did not expect to be entangled like this today. Imo had a rather strange feeling in her heart. She strode in with the child in her arms. The purple bamboo forest, the sea of clouds, and the looming pavilions in the clouds. Every scene was beautiful to the extreme. It was strange that no one had entered the Fantion Palace for tens of thousands of years. But there was no sense of decadence and desolation. Whether it was the flowers, trees, or the pavilions, they all looked as if they had been trimmed and cleaned from time to time. Imo stepped on the green jade cobblestones, and on both sides of the fiery red maple forest. She lowered her head and asked the child in her arms, "What frightened you here?" Shen Yanma blinked his eyes. He was not frightened. He was only anxious because he could not find the way out when he first came in. Yanma was not afraid. "I thought it was fun inside. I kept running around. If father did not come in and carry me out, I would have continued to walk around." Imo glanced at Shenjuli, who was walking beside him. Shenjuli coughed softly. "Nyenma, did you cry when you entered this place?" "I cried. I cried when I couldn't get out." "Then, did you cower under that wall and tremble?" Shenjuli pointed in the direction of a palace wall. Shen Nyenma scratched his head. "I found a hole there. I wanted to go in, but it was very cold when I got close. Therefore he shivered." Shenjuli turned to look at Imo, and said matter-of-factly, "She cried." She shrank into a corner and shivered. "I'm not wrong." Imo. "Shenjuli, you can be more shameless. Mother, there are mythological beasts over there. Let me take you to see them." Shen Yanma struggled to move his body in one direction. Qiongqi, Swan and I, Zhulong, Zhu Ke, and some other mythological beasts were either in the lake on the shore, on both sides of the road, or under the eaves. Some were standing or lying down. Whether it was the scales, feathers, or the colors of the claws, all of them were lifelike. It was as if they could come to life with just a breath. Chapter 1671. She was right. These mythological beasts were all stone statues, but she could not tell what material they were made of. Shen Yanma had already jumped down from the ground and climbed on the back of a Qiongqi. He stood on top of it and said, "Mother, these mythological beasts look so majestic." He then hugged the Qiongqi's big mouth and said, "Nyenma is also majestic." Imo laughed and said, "Little fool, no matter how majestic it looks, it is still made of stone. If you really want to be majestic, then ride on the real one." When she first heard Nyenma talking about the mythological beasts, she was shocked. She was also a little relieved that little Nyenma did not provoke the mythological beasts when he came in alone. Now that she knew that the mythological beasts were fake, she was naturally relieved. She had already looked at the layout of the Fantion Palace. It was indeed a few levels higher than her Emo Palace. However, it was not surprising. The Fantion Palace was the original residence of the Divine Lord. Nobody knew how many times it had been built. Naturally, even a stone could show its elegance. Her Emo Palace was only built less than 2 years ago. It had not really settled down yet. It was normal that it was not as good as the Fantion Palace. However, she did not know where her residence was tens of thousands of years ago. Perhaps, it was not worse than the Fantion Palace. Originally, she was not curious about where she lived. According to her, wherever the mountains are, there are no bones to be buried. Wherever my heart is, that is my home. However, now that she saw the beautiful property of her old rival from tens of thousands of years ago, she began to feel competitive and began to miss her old residence. Of course, Shen Nyenma did not know that his mother's thoughts had begun to wander. He sat on the back of the Qiongqi and was happily kicking his little feet. He even used his fingers to pick the Qiongqi's nostrils. "Little boy, don't destroy the cultural relics," Imo said, and took a step forward to teach Shen Nyenma a lesson. Unexpectedly, when her fingers just touched Shen Nyenma's little hand, the stone Qiongqi suddenly moved. It suddenly let out an earth-shattering sneeze. Imo was not prepared and subconsciously took a step back. She did not know what her heel was, so she stumbled and fell into someone's arms. "Be careful." A familiar smell entered her nose. Imo's heart skipped a beat. When she was about to get up, the other party had already let go of her. At the same time, the Qiongqi's 4 feet, carrying Shen Nyenma, rose into the air. Naturally, Shen Nianma was also shocked. He staggered and fell from the top. However, just as he slid down Qiongqi's body, Qiongqi opened its mouth and swallowed him whole. All of this happened too quickly, so quickly that no one could react in time. By the time Imo realized it, Shen Nianma was already gone. It had been swallowed. It had been swallowed. Her facial expression changed drastically. Nianma. She quickly slapped the gigantic Qiongqi that had suddenly come to life. Shen Juli waved his sleeve, and a white light shot out, cutting off Imo's red light midway. Thus, Imo watched as the large blue Qiongqi spread its wings in the air and flew away in the blink of an eye. With a splash, it jumped into the vast lake in the distance and disappeared without a trace. Imo. Her hands and feet were cold. She slapped Shen Juli, who had suddenly gone crazy. You're crazy. He actually watched the child being swallowed without reacting. She slapped him with anger. Once the wind from her palm was released, it would be filled with an evil aura that could destroy half of the scenery here. However, before she could release the wind from her palm, Shen Juli moved at lightning speed. In the blink of an eye, he was in front of her and raised his hand to hook her wrist. Chapter 1672. However, before she could do anything, Shen Juli was already in front of her in the blink of an eye. He raised his hand and grabbed her wrist. Imo, don't worry. Nianma is fine. Her right wrist was caught, so she could not do anything. She was about to hit him again with her left hand, but she was stunned when she heard what he said. While she was in a daze, he had already hooked his arm around her waist and flew up. I'll take you to see it. Imo was worried about little Nianma, so she did not notice that he was holding her waist. She stared at the lake in the distance. He was swallowed. How can he be fine? Before she could finish her sentence, she saw the waves rolling on the lake, and Qiongqi's broad back was exposed. Little Nianma was riding on Qiongqi's back. He was so happy that he danced. This is so fun. Achoo! Qiongqi's head popped out of the water and sneezed loudly again. Like a whale, it sprayed out waves that were about 30 feet high. The white waves flew down, but they dispersed on top of little Nianma's head and did not splash on him at all. Qiongqi turned around and gently licked little Nianma with its big tongue. Little Nianma was also naughty. He directly used his arms to hug the big tongue and played like a swing. Qiongqi opened its big mouth and slowly retracted its tongue. A moment later, little Nianma sat on its tongue and looked out while holding its fangs. Qiongqi swam in the lake with him in its mouth. Little Nianma's giggles could be heard all over the lake. Imo was speechless. She finally felt relieved. It was only at this moment that she realized that Shen Juli was still holding her waist. Her pretty face was gloomy, and she was about to break free. Unexpectedly, Shen Juli let go of her before she could say anything. He even took a step back and sincerely apologized. I have offended you. Imo was about to scold him, but she could not say anything in front of his gentlemanly behavior. What is going on? Imo's eyes were still fixed on Qiongqi's body in the lake. He was afraid that this fellow would be so happy that it would close its mouth and chew the little guy inside. They are indeed the mythological beasts under my mount. They rely on the aura of God to be reborn. Little Nianma has the aura of God, so he activated them, Shen Juli explained. Then why don't you just activate them? But you let a child take the risk. Imo still had lingering fears as he recalled the scene earlier. They have been sleeping for tens of thousands of years. Whoever can awaken them again, they will recognize that person as their first master. They will absolutely obey their first master and will not harm him. Shen Juli continued to impart to her the knowledge of the mythological beasts. This child was his most precious treasure, so he naturally wanted to find some guardian beasts for his son. As for the divine beasts in his courtyard, they were all ancient divine beasts with extraordinary power. Ordinary immortals and devils couldn't even get close to them. With them by Nianma's side to protect him, he would feel more at ease. Therefore, he directly handed the task of awakening the sleeping divine beasts to his son. In the future, even if he was not by his son's side, no one would be able to plot against the little guy. What happened in the Imo Palace would not happen again. Imo glanced at the surrounding divine beasts that had not yet been awakened. Are they also? She was relieved. Although there were no guards in the Fanteon Palace, with these divine beasts here, it would not be a problem for Nianma to go anywhere he wanted. Perhaps she should take the opportunity to leave while Nianma was having fun in the lake to prevent the little guy from crying. Chapter 1673. Well, since he is having fun here, it is time for me to leave. You can take care of him yourself, Imo said. She waited for a moment, but did not hear Shenjuli's answer. Subconsciously, she turned around and saw that she was the only one left on the shore. Shenjuli was nowhere to be found. Imo was speechless. She quickly scanned her surroundings, but still did not see Shenjuli. How could he disappear at such a critical moment? Imo looked at the child in the lake and the dangerous Qiongqi. She did not dare to leave. It was impossible for such a small child to be alone with no adults. It was too dangerous. Shenjuli was missing, so she had to stay here and watch over him. Imo had the impulse to curse Shenjuli. After he tricked her into coming here, he did not do anything to her. He was even very polite. However, he had helped her, held her and hugged her. Now, he even left her here alone to take care of the child. She could not find a chance to leave. Mother, do you want to come up and play? Qiongqi swam to the shore. Shen Nianma held one of Qiongqi's teeth and stretched out half of his body. He opened his little hand to her eagerly. The veins on Imo's forehead twitched. Nianma, go and play on Qiongqi's back. He had been staying in Qiongqi's mouth for a long time, and it always made her feel scared. She was afraid that Qiongqi would bite him in half on a whim. Mother, you want to play too? Nianma will go on its back. Shen Nianma was negotiating with her, and the kid even rubbed his little belly on Qiongqi's teeth. Imo was afraid that his intestines would be torn apart, so she had to agree. She jumped on Qiongqi's back. Qiongqi seemed to only be sensitive to the bloodline of God. When Imo jumped on its back, it immediately felt offended, and all the scales on its body stood up. It made a threatening sound. Don't be rude to my mother. Shen Nianma threatened as he climbed out of the Qiongqi's mouth and onto its back. Qiongqi probably understood, but was afraid of hurting its little master's delicate skin. So wherever the little fellow crawled, the scales would fall. But after all, it was a mythical beast that only obeyed God or God's bloodline. It was not willing to let Imo sit on its back, so it secretly made its scales into spikes where Imo sat, like a nail board, in order to make Imo retreat. Imo's eyes flashed slightly. Suddenly, he smiled at Shen Nianma. Nianma, you may leave first. Shen Nianma was surprised. Mother, be good. Go down first. If you're not obedient, Mother will leave by herself. This sentence was more effective than any threat to Shen Nianma. He immediately jumped down and stood on the shore. Mother, be careful. Just as he went down, Qiongqi flew up with a whoosh. It flew upside down, straight up 180-degree somersaults, 360-degree turns, and sharp steel knives appeared all over its body. It plunged into the water and rolled in circles. Qiongqi used all the methods he could think of to get rid of them. Unfortunately, Imo seemed to be growing on its back, and it could not get rid of her at all. In the beginning, Qiongqi still cared about Shen Nianma's reputation. He was afraid that he would hurt Imo, so he only wanted to get rid of her, so he used a gentler method. Later on, the methods he used became more and more violent. It was an aquatic beast, so it used all kinds of water spells, but it still did not work. Chapter 1674. It carried her for almost an hour, but it still could not get the person on its back off. It could not help but feel a little discouraged. Are you done? It's my turn, Imo said coldly on its back. She stretched out her little hand and gently patted the back of its neck. Therefore Qiongqi screamed again. It suddenly jumped into the air and fell into the water. 2 hours later, Qiongqi was exhausted. It lay in the water and gasped for breath. Its scales were all subdued. Imo was still sitting on its back. She smiled and patted its head. Not only is your master not easy to mess with, but I am also not easy to mess with. Qiongqi whimpered, but it did not dare to be angry anymore. It was one of the four most ferocious beasts in the ancient times. In its life, it only listened to the teachings of God. Tens of thousands of years ago, it had done evil in the 6 realms. Many immortals and demons wanted to subdue it, but they all failed. It was only after the Divine Lord went and subdued it. It was very proud of itself. Although it had just woken up from a deep sleep for tens of thousands of years, it was confident that ordinary immortals and demons would not be able to get close to it. It did not expect that the delicate little girl in front of it could control it. In the law of the mythological beast, it only obeyed the strong. Therefore, Qiongqi finally became obedient. Mother, you are awesome. Mother, can you play with Nianmo? Shen Nianmo rushed up and climbed onto Qiongqi's back. Imo held him in her arms and took him for a ride on Qiongqi. Shen Juli sat on top of a tree not far away. He looked at the mother and daughter who were playing with each other, and a smile appeared on his face. All he wanted was the warmth of today. The woman he loved and his sensible son were in front of him. They were all happy under his protection. He looked down and looked at his hands. This was a pair of hands that could turn the world upside down. But it was not enough to change all the fates. He only wanted to protect his woman and child for a little longer, before they became very strong. The mother and child were having fun. Even Imo seemed to have forgotten everything. She hugged her son and laughed happily. Ever since they reunited, this was the first time he had seen her so happy and carefree. Shen Juli stared at her intently. It was as if he wanted to carve her figure into the depths of his soul. After watching for a long time, he turned around and left. Where did that bastard Shen Juli go? Did he still want his son? Imo rode Qiongqi and took his son for a ride, while silently observing his surroundings. One was to understand the architectural layout of Fantian Palace, and the other was to find Shen Juli. This person couldn't just abandon his son to her just to keep her here, right? What was this? Another way to keep her here. After playing for a while, she felt a little angry, as if she had been tricked by him again. Mother, Nianma is hungry. Shen Nianma had enough fun and finally thought of his tummy. Coincidentally, his stomach growled a few times. Imo rubbed her eyebrows. She was not familiar with Fantian Palace, so she did not know where to find food. Moreover, this place had been sealed for tens of thousands of years. Even if there were still food stored, it would have been rotten long ago. Should she bring Nianma back to Emo Palace and raise him there? She had gathered a lot of top chefs there. Little Nianma also liked to eat the food that they made. She just had the idea of going back home. Chapter 1675. Just as she was about to return home, she suddenly heard the sound of a zither coming from the purple bamboo forest in the distance. The sound of the zither pierced through the clouds and water, making people feel like they were bathed in a spring breeze. Imo's heart jumped. Shen Juli, this person had her take care of the child here. But he was leisurely playing the zither. Damn it. When Qiongqi heard the zither, its 2 little ears perked up. It folded its wings and flew towards the sound of the zither. The swallow grass swayed in the wind like silk. This grassland was surrounded by purple bamboo. In the middle of the grassland, there was an extremely lush and tall tree. Its leaves were like red maple, but the color was much brighter than red maple. It was like a raging fire shining like the clouds. Shen Juli was dressed in a white robe as he sat under a tree. He placed a guqin on his lap and started to play. A series of notes flowed from his fingertips. The fiery red maple leaves fell and swirled around him as they fluttered in the wind. The scenery was beautiful to the extreme. Imo had to admit that Shen Juli was truly beautiful. He didn't need to do anything deliberately. He just sat there casually, and it was a beautiful scene that even the painters couldn't paint. The sound of the zither was so beautiful that Qiongqi was afraid of disturbing the person playing it. It folded its wings and landed on the ground. It was rare for such a huge body to not make any noise when it landed. Not even a blade of grass was disturbed. Imo had a stomach full of anger, but the sound of the zither had the effect of cleansing the soul. It actually made the anger in her heart slowly dissipate like a deflated balloon. She originally wanted to scold him, but after landing, she couldn't bear to interrupt him. She stopped in place. It was better to wait until he finished playing. and then deal with him. Fortunately, this song wasn't long. It was only 2 or 3 minutes. When he plucked the last note, the sound of the zither curled up and stopped. The maple leaves that were flying around him also floated down. Your Excellency is so leisurely and carefree. You don't care about your son? Amo's cold voice finally scolded him. Shunjuli raised his head to look at her. His gaze was gentle. With you looking after him, I'm very relieved. Imo, she sneered again. So you kidnapped me to help you look after your child. Shunjuli stood up and walked towards her step by step. Imo raised his eyebrows and looked at him, not retreating a single step. Others were afraid of his divine might, but she wasn't. Her aura was not any weaker than his. Although she was small, her aura was not small. Her powerful aura spread out in all directions, causing Cheongqi to tremble and take a step back. Shunjuli walked up to her and asked, "Are you very angry?" Imo snorted but didn't say anything. His figure was tall and big, while her body was relatively short. Compared to him, she could be considered petite and dainty. That was the difference in height between men and women, but not the difference in aura between gods and devils. His figure almost covered her entire body. The feeling of being lower in height made her uncomfortable. But if she suddenly became taller, it would seem a little intentional. How about she stand on the big rock next to her? In the time she was stunned, Shunjuli had already approached her. Imo wanted to retreat, but she wasn't willing. If she didn't retreat, she couldn't suppress him with her aura. After a moment of hesitation, his hand fell on her shoulder. Why are you like a little hedgehog? Are you afraid of me? Afraid of him? Imo curled her lips into a smile. You think too much. Just as she was about to rudely slap his hand away, his hand moved automatically. Like magic, he held out a bouquet of flowers. This is for you. How about it as my apology? Chapter 1676. Oh God, his father sent her flowers again. How obsessed was his father to be with flowers? He kept getting thrown away, and he kept getting sent away. He was so strong. Shin Nianma could not bear to look anymore, so he turned his head away. Imo looked at the flowers in front of her. The light blue buds were slightly transparent, and there seemed to be a fluorescent glow on the buds. It was a species that she had never seen before. How many of the flowers that she had thrown away were the ones that she had seen before? Every time she saw these flowers, she had an illusion that she did not know enough about plants. She was very knowledgeable about flowers and plants. However, compared to the flowers that he had sent her, she felt that she was very naive. To be honest, this bouquet of flowers was especially beautiful. Moreover, it was very suitable for her. If it was from someone else, she might have accepted it. However, it was from him. She had already habitually wanted to destroy it. Therefore, she smiled and raised her hand to take it. As usual, she wanted to blow all the flowers away in one breath. However, he had already said, "This is the last bouquet of flowers that I have sent you. Can you let it bloom a little longer?" The last bouquet? It seemed that he finally realized that flowers could not move her, so he would not send her any more in the future. At least he knew what was good for him. Imo looked at him, and then looked at the flowers in her hand. She smiled faintly. Okay, I will let it bloom a little longer. She began to pull the petals one by one. When she pulled them into her palm, she gently blew them away. She watched the petals fly away. Therefore, when one petal flew away, she pulled another one. Shin Nianma was speechless. Mother, you are awesome. Shunjuli's eyes flickered slightly. Perhaps he had been beaten up too many times, so he was no longer angry. He even raised his hand and gently rubbed her hair. This is a good idea. You can take your time to tear it. Before Imo could dodge, he had already stepped back a few steps away from her. He smiled and watched her tear the petals. Imo was speechless. She originally did this to make him angry, but unexpectedly, it did not make him angry. Instead, she felt that it was a little silly to tear the petals one by one. Therefore, after a while she stopped. Then, she opened her mouth and blew at the stamen. Suddenly, the petals flew like rain, and the blue petals fell like stars. Not only that, but there was also a lot of pollen in the stamen. When she blew, the pollen wafted out and inevitably inhaled into her nose. The fragrance of the flowers was intoxicating and faint, but it actually made her feel refreshed. It felt as if she had eaten a ginseng fruit. Even the blood in her body suddenly became lively and flowed rapidly in her body. Her qi and blood were flowing too fast. Before she could ask Shen Jili what he was up to, she subconsciously took a step back and wanted to meditate. Suddenly, the light in front of her eyes dimmed, and her lips felt warm. Someone had suddenly sucked on them. She was fighting against her bloodline that was about to go berserk. She never thought that he would take this opportunity to kiss her. With a loud bang in her head, he had already skillfully pried open her teeth and blew into her mouth. The qi was extremely clear, and before she could react, it had already entered her stomach. Bastard, he actually kissed her in front of the child. Imo was enraged and sent a palm strike towards him. If she did not beat him up, he would not know why the flowers were so red. However, this time, Shen Jili was obviously prepared. Just as her palm was about to hit him, it was directly caught by him. Then he blew a second breath into her mouth. This time, the qi was scorching hot, and it went directly into her throat. Just like the first breath, it went straight into her stomach. Chapter 1677. All of this happened in the blink of an eye. Coupled with the fact that Imo's blood and qi were surging too violently, her brain was slightly sluggish. By the time she had fully reacted, and was about to use her devil arts to attack him, he had already let go of her, and retreated a few steps. Imo was fuming with rage. Her pretty face turned cold. Bastard! She flipped her palms, and a red light flew out like lightning. It exploded in the air, and turned into countless sharp blades. Like a net, it covered Shen Jili's head. Mother! Little Nianma screamed. He was so scared that his throat was about to break. Imo's heart tightened, and she subconsciously retracted her magical power. Don't retract it. Shen Jili suddenly slammed his palm toward her. The white light was blazing and whistling toward her. Was he crazy? Imo was furious. She simply used all her strength and slammed toward Shen Jili. Shen Jili waved his sleeves and protected Shen Nianma, who was standing next to him, with a wizardry barrier. Then, he used his palm to catch Imo's attack. The most important thing in a battle between masters was to be distracted. With such a slight delay, his body was hit by the red light. His face turned a little pale, but he did not retreat. Instead, he moved forward and circled around Imo as if he was tempting her to attack. Imo's brain was buzzing, and there seemed to be something screaming and roaring in her head. When she was playing with Shen Nianma, she was in a peaceful mood. Her pair of eyes unknowingly turned black, but now her eyes were completely red, redder than the setting sun. Her mind was blank, and only inexplicable thoughts of killing were raging in her chest. She seemed to have gone crazy. She slammed her palms one after another, without paying attention to whether she hit the target or not. Strangely, the more she slammed her palms with all her strength, the more comfortable the blood in her body was. It was as if the devil in her body was finally released and finally had a chance to explode. Finally, she gradually slowed down, as if the devil was finally released. Her mind gradually cleared up. When reason finally crept back into her brain, she abruptly retracted her palm. Looking at everything around her, she was stunned. The grassland was gone, and the purple bamboo forest in the distance looked as if it had been swept by a typhoon, collapsing to the ground. The lush tree in the middle of the grassland was also gone, leaving only a bottomless pit in its place. Even some of the pavilions and buildings in the distance were completely destroyed. It collapsed all over the ground. As far as the eye could see, everything seemed to have been swept away by a typhoon of more than 10 magnitude, and no one could see their original appearance anymore. This destructive power. She subconsciously looked around, but all she could see were broken walls, broken branches, and broken leaves. She couldn't see anyone else at all. Where was Shen Jili? Where was Nianma? Could it have been destroyed by her demonic nature? Imo's heart was beating wildly. She didn't know if it was because she was exhausted or because she was nervous, but her fingers were trembling in her sleeves. Her figure flashed, and she couldn't help but look around. In the deep pit, under the fallen purple bamboo, among the broken walls, she had searched all the places where people could be hidden, but she couldn't find any trace of the father and son. Could it be? Shenjuli was the divine lord. How could he be so weak? She was getting more and more nervous, and her legs began to weaken. She stood at the edge of the deep pit, and was about to jump into the pit to look for him. Suddenly, someone gently patted her shoulder. "Are you looking for me?" The voice was as cold as usual. Imo suddenly turned around and looked at the person who was standing behind her. Chapter 1678. Shenjuli was standing behind her, an arm's length away from her. He did not seem to be injured. His white robe was still dazzling, and his demeanor was still elegant. However, his face was slightly pale. Shin Nianma was sitting in the wizardry barrier behind him. He looked confused as if he had just woken up. He looked at her and smiled. His voice was gentle and teasing. "Are you worried about me?" Imo finally felt relieved. Hearing his words, she rubbed her eyebrows and said coldly, "I am worried about Nianma. Fortunately, he is fine. He will be fine with me protecting him." Shenjuli finally opened the wizardry barrier and let the little guy out. Shin Nianma cried as soon as he landed. "Mother, father, please don't fight. I am scared." Imo regretted it. What was wrong with her just now? It was like an active volcano that had erupted. In the beginning, she wanted to give him a slap to teach him a lesson for his lecherous behavior. Later, she did not know what happened. She could not control herself. "Nianma, your mother and I did not fight. We were just learning from each other." Shenjuli carried his son and comforted him. But mother was so fierce just now. Shin Nianma was frightened. Shenjuli was a little regretful. When he led Imo to attack, her attack was too fierce. He did not seal little Nianma's 5 senses in time and let him see something. Imo seemed to be possessed by a demon. She was surrounded by a red light. She used all her strength in every attack, so he had to try his best to resist and guide her. "Nianma, come here. Let me see if I hurt you." Ning Xuema looked at her son's pale face and felt even more regretful. She wanted to carry him over to have a look. Little Nianma shrank into Shenjuli's arms and subconsciously avoided her hand. There was a flash of fear in his eyes as he looked at her. Imo was shocked by his expression. It was as if she was pricked by a needle. She slowly withdrew her hand. Then she looked up at Shenjuli and asked, "What did you do to me just now?" Her condition just now was obviously abnormal. It seemed to have something to do with his flower and the 2 breaths. Now, her blood was no longer boiling, but she felt extremely tired all over, as if she had just finished running a marathon. "To treat your chronic illness?" Shenjuli smiled faintly. "How do you feel now?" Amo's heart skipped a beat. How did he know she had a chronic illness? She raised her eyebrows and looked at him. "What chronic illness do I have? Does not age count?" Shenjuli replied. Imo was speechless. She really couldn't grow up. She had looked like this when she first woke up on this continent. 3 years later, she was still the same. Her height and appearance were still that of a lowly. However, she didn't really care about her appearance. Whether she was a lowly or a mature woman, it made no difference to her. "What does that have to do with you?" "It has a lot to do with this." Shenjuli looked at her from head to toe. He even paused for a moment at her underdeveloped chest. His gaze was too sharp. It was as if he was a pervert. Amo's ears turned red. If little Nianma was not here, she would have called him a pervert. She did not want to face him anymore, so she turned and walked away. "Xuema, do you really not like me anymore?" he suddenly asked behind her. Imo paused for a moment and finally turned around. She looked at him sincerely. "Divine Lord, have we broken off the engagement?" Chapter 1679. Imo paused for a moment and finally turned around to look at him sincerely. "Divine Lord, have we broken off the engagement?" "Yes. That's it. There's no engagement between us. I really don't have any feelings for you. In the future, you'll go your own way, and I'll go mine. I really don't think there's any need for me to answer your question just now. Also, I am not Xuema. I am Imo." Shenjuli looked down and smiled. "Well, take care." He did not intend to ask her to stay. Imo then turned around and left. She was about to turn around the corner. "Mother." Shin Nianma could not help but call out from behind. Amo's footsteps paused for a moment, but he didn't look back. His figure gradually disappeared into the purple bamboo forest, and his shadow could no longer be seen. Shen Nianma cried out loud. Father, does mother not want us anymore? Shen Juli's face was pale. He rubbed his hand on his head. Don't worry. Your mother will not abandon you. His father had never lied to him. Naturally, he would not this time. Shen Nianma was finally relieved. His stomach was full of hunger. He pursed his lips. Father, I am hungry. Shen Juli raised his sleeve, and a table appeared on the ground. There were a few dishes and a few pastries on the table. It looked very sumptuous. The tempting fragrance of the food rushed into his nose. Shen Nianma immediately cheered and jumped down from the ground to the table. Wow, there are so many delicious food. He sat there and wolfed down the food. Ah, these are all things that mother likes to eat. Father, you should have asked mother to stay for a meal just now. She will be happy to see these. Shen Nianma's little mouth was full, and he felt a little regretful. Shen Juli sat at the side and watched his son eat. He did not speak. He also did not move. After a while, Shen Nianma was finally full. As a child, he was full of energy. He pulled Shen Juli's hand and asked him to bring him around. Shen Juli patted his head and said, Nianma, you will be a senior immortal in the future. A senior immortal should be independent. It is not right for you to always need your parents to follow you. Be good and go play by yourself. I will test you on your homework later. Her words made Shen Nianma puff out his chest. All right, I will go and play by myself. He then ran away. Shen Juli glanced at Qiongqi, who had just returned. Qiongqi shuddered and immediately followed little Nianma. As soon as Shen Nianma left, Shen Juli's body swayed slightly and almost fell to the ground. He took advantage of the situation and fell to the ground. Blood seeped out from the corner of his mouth, and his face became as white as snow. Although he had resolved most of Amo's crazy attack, he was still injured. His blood was boiling, and he almost could not hold on. He sat there and meditated. The wind blew his robe, as if he would disappear at any time. When Amo returned to Mo Palace, Shui Ilan and General Manager Himu were already impatient. When they saw her return, they were relieved. Unexpectedly, Shui Ilan was still wearing that pink robe. If other men were to wear this robe, it would make others feel terrified. But when he wore this robe, it was as exquisite as an ink painting, even more beautiful and dazzling than peach blossoms. Momo, are we still going on with the wedding? Shui Ilan followed her and smiled enchantingly. Imo waved her hand and said, You can leave now. She had successfully broken off the engagement, so there was no need for her to act. Chapter 1680. Shui Ilan's bewitching peach blossom eyes sparkled. Momo, actually, I don't mind making it real. I do mind. Imo answered straightforwardly and yawned lazily. Shui Ilan, you can return to your demon clan. Don't worry, I'll keep my promise to you. She was really tired after a day of torment. She just wanted to have a good sleep, and didn't want to deal with anyone else. Shui Ilan's eyes flickered slightly. He paused and sighed softly. Okay, Momo, can I still come to see you in the future? Let's leave it to fate. Imo yawned again, and turned to go back inside. Looking at her back, Shui Ilan was lost in thought for a moment. He knew that she was disgusted with the matters of love and love. Therefore this time, he couldn't pester her like before. He had to take it slow. Imo returned to her bedroom and didn't think about anything. She slept soundly for a long time. She even had a dream. In the dream, there were gusts of wind, dense fog, mountains collapsed and rivers flowed backward. She and a man in white stood opposite each other. You and I love each other, so we're getting rid of evil for the people. A woman's voice floated in the air. She seemed to be joking. Marry me, or should I marry you? In your dreams. A cold voice pierced through the clouds. Along with these two words, a sword with flowing light flew in all directions. Imo shivered and woke up from her dream. She rubbed her forehead. She could still remember most of the scene in her dream, but she couldn't remember the appearance of the man in white. It seemed to be very handsome. She could still remember that voice. It seemed to be Shen Juli. Could it be that her dream was a scene from tens of thousands of years ago? She sat there and thought for a long time. Besides this scene, She couldn't remember anything else. In her dream, Shunjuli really didn't show any mercy to her. After she woke up, she seemed to be able to feel the cold and murderous intent. She yawned and patted her small mouth. It seemed like the rumors were true. She and he were really enemies tens of thousands of years ago. No wonder she felt that he was an eyesore when she saw him this time. After being engaged to him, she felt as if she was sitting on pins and needles. She thought of ways to break off this engagement. So this was the reason. She got up to wash her face and rinse her mouth. As she was combing her hair, she inadvertently looked into the bronze mirror and was suddenly stunned. In the mirror appeared a woman in her late 20s. She had large eyes, a small mouth, red lips, and white teeth. Her beauty was unparalleled. Her appearance was still the same as before, but she had grown quite a bit. She sat there and looked at the mirror for a moment. She raised her hand and touched her face. The woman in the mirror also raised her hand and touched her face. He had actually grown up. He grew up overnight. She used to look like she was 13 or 14 years old, but now she looked like she was 17 or 18 years old. She was like a flower that was about to bloom. It seemed that Shunjuli was telling the truth when he said that he wanted to treat her chronic illness. The flowers he gave her and the forced kiss at the end were all for this. She looked at herself in the mirror again and looked at her forehead. There was a cloud-shaped cinnabar mole on her forehead. It was very delicate and beautiful, adding to her beauty. She walked out of the hall. Head steward Himu was waiting outside. When he saw her like this, he was stunned. Devil master. Imo smiled, a smile that could topple cities. She turned in a circle. How is it? Am I beautiful? Head steward Himu was so stunned that he almost stuttered. Beautiful. She was really too beautiful. He had never seen a woman more beautiful than the Devil Master. Chapter 1681. She was too pleasing to the eye. Manager Himu had never seen a woman more beautiful than the Devil Master. Especially her temperament. She was pure yet enchanting yet charming. She had the innocence of a child, yet the naivety of a young girl. They were clearly contradictory characteristics, but when they were concentrated on her, they were incomparably harmonious. Manager Himu almost couldn't move his eyes away. Although the original Imo also smiled, there was always an indescribable gloominess around her that made people feel an inexplicable sense of oppression when they were by her side. Now, however, that shadow was gone. She even had a bit of sunshine to her. Manager Himu finally remembered his mission. Devil Master, the courtyard next door, should we clear it out? That person was a supreme god. He definitely wouldn't come back. The Devil Master did not find him pleasing to the eye. With that courtyard there, it was inevitable that he would be displeased. Amo's gaze swept over the courtyard. Her vision blurred, and she seemed to see him floating over. When she rubbed her eyes again, that person disappeared again. She was actually seeing things. He had been living there for the past few days. Every time she opened her eyes, she would see him. It had actually become a habit. It wasn't strange that she was seeing things. She felt inexplicably anxious. She waved her hand. I'll take care of it. You don't have to worry about it. Head steward Himu nodded and left. Imo had nothing to do, so she strolled around the courtyard next door. She paused at the door for a moment, then walked into his room. She rarely came here. Too many things had happened the last time she was here. She didn't have time to see the layout. Now that she had the time and the mood, she casually glanced around. The layout of the room was low-key yet grand. Whether it was the screen with the fox painting, or the small jade ornaments on the table, all of them showed the owner's taste. His taste and taste were extraordinarily elegant. She vaguely felt that the layout here was familiar. Even the gums behind the screen looked familiar. It was as if she had lived in a place like this before. She walked over and sat on the gums. In a daze, she seemed to see a man and a woman rolling on the gums and kissing. The kiss was so passionate that she almost wanted to go to bed. Hey Guru, you still haven't given me an explanation. I don't want to have an unclear relationship with you. The woman finally pushed the man away. Shuama, hurry up and level up. The man's voice was hoarse, as if he was holding something back. Finally, he let go of the woman. The woman turned around and sat up. Her face was as red as rouge. Alright. You should leave quickly. My small temple can't accommodate a big bodhisattva like you. Then how about you go to my main hall? My temple is big enough to accommodate you. Go to your main hall. Alright, give me a corresponding position. The temple is so big. It shouldn't be a problem for me to sit next to you, right? The woman giggled, almost hanging on the man's arm. The intimacy between them was obvious. It depends on your performance. The man replied to her, and raised his hand to rub her head. I will definitely rise to level 8 within 2 years. The woman was full of confidence. Let's wait and see. Amo's heart skipped a beat. The hand that was stroking the gums trembled, and the illusion disappeared. The man just now should be Shunjuli. And the woman looked like herself. She subconsciously touched her face again. That woman's appearance was almost exactly the same as her current appearance. Chapter 1682. The only difference was the cinnabar mole on her forehead. Shuema's cinnabar mole was in the shape of a snowflake, while hers was in the shape of a cloud. Shuema. Could it be that her name was Shuema before she was reborn? She actually had such a deep entanglement with Shunjuli. And the layout of this house was really similar to the layout of the side hall she saw in the illusion. In other words, this house was decorated according to Shuema's original residence. It seemed that he was very infatuated with Shuema, and Shuema's love for him was also very obvious. But why did they separate? She suddenly felt a little flustered. She didn't know why, but whenever she thought about what happened before she was reborn, she subconsciously wanted to escape, as if there was a terrible thing hidden in it that she had to forget at all costs. She touched her chest with her fingers and could feel a magic seal there. It should be a memory that was sealed. The memory that made her use this kind of magic to seal must not be a good memory. She better not think about it. She didn't want to make things difficult for herself. And to break this seal, she had to pay a huge price. It would take her 3/4 of her magic power. It wasn't worth it. She didn't want to think about it anymore. She stood up and looked at everything in the room. It seemed to be filled with the aura of Shunjuli and Shuema, which made her feel a little uncomfortable. She waved her sleeve and a red light flashed. Everything in the room disappeared. She had directly moved it to another dimension. The room was empty. She couldn't see anything anymore. There was no aura that he used to live here. She sighed slightly and walked out of the room. She saw the heavenly fire flower blooming in the flower bed. It stood there alone, with layers of petals stretched out and swaying in the breeze. Ayamo bent her fingers. She subconsciously wanted to destroy the flower that he had personally planted here. Suddenly, the image of him desperately protecting this flower flashed in her mind. Her fingertips stiffened, and she couldn't cast the magic spell. Forget it. It's just a flower. It doesn't matter if it grows here. There's no need to destroy it so cleanly. Whether it lives or dies depends on its luck. She turned and walked out. The swing was still the same swing, and the grass was still the same grass. Ayamo swung gently on the swing. Not far away, the children were still playing. Everything returned to normal. Everything seemed to have returned to the beginning. The only thing that had changed was her state of mind, and of course her appearance. She looked at the children, and suddenly felt a little irritated. She missed little Nyenma. Time flowed like water. It had been more than 2 months since Shunjuli brought the children back to Brahma Palace. Since that time, she hadn't seen them even once. In the past 2 months, she had participated in the Flower Appreciation Festival organized by the Celestial World. She was the Devil Master, so of course she was invited. Now the 4 seas are at peace and the 6 realms are at peace. The Flower Appreciation Banquet held in the immortal world was just a way to bond with each other, just like the cocktail parties held by the upper class in modern times. The Flower Appreciation Festival was extraordinarily grand. The leaders of the 6 realms gave the immortal realm a lot of face, and almost all of them attended. Originally, Ayamo wasn't interested in these kinds of invitations. She had received all kinds of invitations before, but she had rejected them all without hesitation. However, this time, she was probably too bored, so she unexpectedly agreed to attend. She thought that she would meet Shunjiuli and his son at the Flower Appreciation Festival. Chapter 1683. Of course, she did not expect to meet Shunjiuli. Both of them were born to be enemies. It was already fortunate that they did not fight when they met. It was better for them to meet as little as possible. She mainly missed little Nianma. The little guy had only been with her for slightly more than a month, but she could not let go of him. When she slept at night, she thought that the pillow next to her was him, and hugged it in her arms. After all, the pillow was dead, so she could not feel it. She even had insomnia several times because of this. General Manager Heimu was a very considerate person. He actually got her a child who was about the same age as Nianma. The child looked very cute, but when she hugged the child, she could not feel the same way as when she hugged little Nianma. There was a strong sense of strangeness. She felt very awkward when she hugged the child, so she asked General Manager Heimu to send the child away. General Manager Heimu did not give up. He searched everywhere for such a small child, and sent it to her, so that she could feel it again. However, she did not feel it. Instead, she became more and more annoyed. In the end, she scolded General Manager Heimu, and finally stopped him from sending the child away. She thought that she was just not used to it. Time was the best medicine to cure everything. As time went by, she would probably get used to it. However, she did not expect that she was getting more and more uncomfortable. In the end, she finally admitted that she missed her child. She missed little Nianma. There were a few times when she wanted to go to Fantion Palace, but when she thought of the harsh words she said before she left, she did not want to go anymore. Since she had already gone her separate ways with that person, what was the point of always thinking about his child? She did not see little Nianma at the Flower Appreciation Festival, because Shunjiuli did not go at all. She knew from the little immortals that the gate of Fantion Palace had been closed for the past 2 months. Even when the Celestial Emperor personally came to visit, he did not see anyone. The gate was not even open. If it were not for the faint white light emitted by the Divine Lord living in Fantion Palace, the Celestial Emperor would have thought that the Divine Lord had run away with her son. Of course, the Celestial Emperor wanted to invite the Divine Lord to this Flower Appreciation Festival, but she did not give him face at all. Since Imo did not see little Nianma, he felt that the Flower Appreciation Festival was rather boring. Hence, he went back after hanging around for a while. In the blink of an eye, another half a month had passed. She felt that her longing for little Nianma was increasing day by day. She could not bring herself to do anything. Reporting to the Devil Master, the Demon King has come to visit. Chief Steward Himu reported to her. Let him in. Imo ordered. The Demon King was naturally Shuailan. His red robe was like a raging fire. When he stood there, he looked like a big red flower blooming on the grass. It was quite refreshing. Recently, he often visited Imo Palace, and had already become a frequent visitor. When it came to talking, he was very good at grasping the boundaries. When he saw that Imo was getting impatient, he would take the initiative to leave. He would not bother her, and he would not come every day. Basically, he would come every 3 to 5 days. He had a lot of skills. He played the guqin well, and he knew how to behave. He was also humorous and witty. He often told her some interesting things that happened in the 6 realms recently. It helped her a lot to relieve her loneliness. Shuailan came in with a happy face. When he saw Gu Shijio sitting on the swing, he smiled. Momo, are you bored? Let's go out and have some fun, shall we? Imo paused on the swing. She seemed to have been a little more indoors recently. Chapter 1684. Imo paused on the swing. She did seem to be staying at home recently. It was good to go out and play. If she didn't go out soon, she felt like she would be bored out of her wits. Okay. She jumped down from the swing. Where are we going? How about the human world? Shuailan suggested. Imo frowned and subconsciously shook her head. No. She didn't know why, but she had some resistance to the human world. Then go to our demon world? Recently, the flowers in the demonic pond suddenly bloomed. They're very beautiful. Hey, don't the flowers in the pond only bloom once every 1,000 years? I heard that they bloomed once 3 years ago. Why are they blooming again now? There must be something wrong. Devil Master, we're demons to begin with. Maybe they bloomed earlier under the nourishment of your magic power? Shuailan's smile was even more seductive than the flowers. Why don't we go take a look? Maybe they'll feel your aura and bloom even more fiercely. Shuailan, you've become much smoother recently. Imo glanced at him from the corner of her eyes. Shuailan looked at her with a smile, his eyes flashing. No, it's not smooth talking. It's my sincerity to the Devil Master. How about it? Do you want to go? Let's go. Imo was straightforward. She wanted to see how beautiful the flowers that didn't bloom according to the rules were. Shuailan's eyes immediately curved. He bowed and extended his hand towards her. How about letting this little Wang lead the way for Devil Master? He acted like a servant asking the Empress Dowager to rise. Imo burst out laughing. A smile to topple a city, another smile to topple a country. Shuailan looked at her, and couldn't help but recite 2 lines of a poem. Imo faintly felt that the 2 lines of the poem were familiar. She asked, You know how to drop books? Where did you learn them? Learn from you. Shuailan subconsciously blurted out these 2 words. Just as he was about to say learn from you, he suddenly remembered something and changed his words. It's very normal to learn from you. As for these 2 lines of poetry, I accidentally came across them. All right, let's go. If we're late, the flower might have wilted. Just as he said this, a commotion suddenly came from the front yard. In the distance, a huge creature swooped down toward Imo Palace. Imo raised his head subconsciously. When he saw the huge creature, his expression changed. The behemoth was the size of a house, and looked like a pig without a head. It had 2 pairs of fleshy wings, and its entire body was pink. It looked extremely strange. Primordial beast chaos. At this moment, the guards in Imo Palace were already alarmed. Seeing that primal chaos was charging towards Imo Palace with the force of a thunderbolt, they all flew up to stop it. Some used their magic treasures, some used their spells, and some used their weapons. It smashed towards the primal chaos. Hundun did not slow down at all. There seemed to be a protective shield around its body. All the magic treasures, spells, and weapons bounced off before they could even touch its body. It was extraordinarily powerful. General Manager Himu's expression changed. He was about to mobilize the troops. Imo raised her hand. Pass down my order. Don't attack. Let it in. She recognized Hundun. She had seen it in Fantion Palace before. However, at that time, it was only a stone statue, and had not been activated. Although head steward Himu was worried, he still obeyed her words and sent a signal to her. Only then did the guards open a path for Hundun. Almost in the blink of an eye, Hundun arrived at the back garden. It folded its wings and landed. Imo's heart thumped wildly. He looked up. Mother! A tender voice sounded from Hundun's back. Following the voice, a boy flew down and pounced directly at Imo. Chapter 1685. Nyema. Imo immediately hugged him. As soon as the soft little body was in her arms, Imo's heart beat wildly, as if it had fallen into a warm pool of water. She was indescribably satisfied. That child was Shin Nyema. She had not seen him for nearly 3 months, and he had grown a lot. He used to look like a 1-year-old, but now he looked like a 3-year-old. His black hair was hanging down, and his little lips were red. His eyes were bright, and he was in high spirits. Especially his red robe, which was as dazzling as the fire. He looked like a red boy in a painting. Imo could not help but raise her hand to touch his arms and legs. She felt that the little guy had become much stronger. The little guy used to be made of crystal. Although it was beautiful, it was easy to break. Now it seemed to be made of white jade. His skin was delicate, smooth, and strong. Mother, I missed you so much. Shin Nyema probably missed her very much. As soon as he was in her arms, he generously kissed Imo on the face. When she hugged the little guy again, all the gloominess in Imo's heart was swept away. She also kissed her son on the face. Mother missed you too. The mother and son pair were being affectionate, leaving Shuailan hanging to the side. Shuailan looked at the scene in silence. He looked at Shin Nyema, and did not know what to say for a moment. It was the first time he saw Shin Nyema. The last time they met, this kid was still in the stone. Shen Nianma looked like his father. He was almost a copy of Shen Juli's appearance, but their personalities were poles apart. Mother, you have become much prettier. Shen Nianma looked at his mother carefully with his big eyes. It was the first time he saw his mother as a grown-up, but it was not strange because she looked closer to the person that his father had painted. The little guy was very sweet. Imo could not help but rub his head. You have grown a lot too. She then looked at Hun Dun, who had become smaller not far away. You can even control it. Of course, mother. I have all the 8 mythological beasts and they all listen to me. Shen Nianma was proud. Imo's eyes flickered. It had only been 3 months since they last saw each other. But the little fellow's skills had simply increased by leaps and bounds. Just now, when he leaped into the air, it was already a strength that even the experts of the immortal world might not be able to achieve. Shuilan, who had been ignored for a long time, finally spoke. Imo, why don't we go out and play together? I am not going. Imo refused without hesitation. His eyes were still fixed on Shen Nianma's face. Shuilan was speechless. He paused for a moment and said, Do you miss Nianma? We can bring him along. He's a boy, and he's been cooped up in Fantian Palace all this time. Now that he's finally out, do you want him to be cooped up in Fantian Palace? It's better for children to go out and see more. Imo immediately asked his son, Nianma, do you want to go out and play? Shen Nianma looked at her, and then looked at Shuilan. His eyes flashed. Nianma wants to go out. However, I only want to go out with my mother. I don't want anyone else. Shuilan's lips twitched. He faintly felt that something was wrong. When he was about to speak, Imo had already waved at him. Shuilan, go and see the demonic flowers by yourself. He lowered his head and asked his son, Where do you want to go? The mortal world. Shen Nianma answered with 2 words. Good. Then, let's go to the mortal world. Shuilan was speechless. Devil Lord, can you have some integrity? You can't have a son and everything will be fine. He was about to remind Imo, but unexpectedly, the little boy in her arms glanced at him with his big eyes and asked very innocently, Mother, why is this uncle still here? Chapter 1686. So Imo also looked at him and asked with some surprise, Do you still have something to do? Haven't you left yet? Shuilan. He dryly exhorted. Then you should be careful and have fun. Then, he left with a little heart that was almost hurt. His back looked a little bleak. In the boundless mortal world, everyone was busy. The streets were paved with bluestones. Rows of buildings, hawkers, and pedestrians hurriedly walked along the street. It was different from the high and mighty celestial world, and also different from the unrestrained prosperity of the Devil Kingdom. This place was more down to earth. Imo and Shen Nianma walked on the street. Everything around them seemed familiar yet strange. Hun Dun had turned into the shape of a little pig and swaggered beside Shen Nianma. From time to time, it attracted the attention of others. In the city where they came from, there were many pet beasts, but most of them were ferocious beasts, such as wolves, bears, tigers, and leopards. Each one was more majestic than the other. Only the mother and daughter were accompanied by a miniature version of a little pig. The mother and daughter were very good-looking. With such a little pig beside them, the number of people who turned to look at them was 100%. Many people were stunned by them. Some even began to follow them from afar. Soon people found that the little pig was different. The little pig was more delicate than the ordinary pigs. It had double eyelids, big eyes, and long eyelashes. When it looked at people, it even blinked. This little pig was very arrogant. It raised its head high, and even its little tail, which was supposed to be a question mark, stood up like an antenna. What was more strange was that when the ferocious beasts passed by with their masters saw the pig, their bodies trembled like sifting chaff. They were almost paralyzed on the spot, and their masters could not pull them up. It wasn't until the mother and daughter pair, and the piglet had gone far away, that those ferocious beasts struggled to get up in fear. However, they no longer dared to walk in the same direction. Almost all of them turned around and ran back. For a moment, there was quite a bit of chaos on the street. Shen Nianma certainly knew that it was caused by Hun Dun. He patted the little pig's head and said, "Little Zhu, keep a low profile." Hundun was crying. It was a dignified mythological beast, but it had turned into a pig. Was it not low-key enough? However, since it was the little master's order, it naturally had to obey unconditionally. Thus, it lowered its tail that was raised high and deliberately coiled it into a question mark. It blinked its eyes and asked, "Like this?" Shen Nianma nodded. "Yes, I feel much better." Imo raised his hand and rubbed his eyebrows. A mythological beast that could turn the world upside down was as obedient as a kitten in front of Shen Nianma. She had already talked to Shen Nianma. She knew that he had been diligently cultivating in the Fantian Palace for the past 3 months. He would wake up in the morning and memorize books for 2 hours. After memorizing the books, he would go to cultivate. In the afternoon or at night, he would wake up a mythological beast. Not only that, he also had to master the key points of raising the mythological beasts and make them truly obey him. Little Nianma had been very busy for the past 3 months. This was because these divine beasts all had their own bad tempers. Some of them were full of childlike innocence, such as this Hundun. Some were tall and mighty, such as Qiongqi. There were also those who smiled and pretended to be very talented, but were actually full of evil tricks, such as Lao Ai. Little Nianma had to guide them according to their temperament to truly control them. Shen Juli was very strict with him. Every day he personally supervised him to practice. He could not be careless. After all, children were playful. Sometimes, when little Nianma was tired of practicing, he would throw a tantrum and slack off. Chapter 1687. After all, children were playful. Sometimes, when little Nianma was tired of practicing, he would throw a tantrum and slack off. As long as Shen Juli saw it, he would be severely punished. Every punishment was a painful experience for little Nianma. He would remember it for a few days after each punishment. Gradually, he did not dare to slack off. Naturally, little Nianma was resentful. He felt that his father was not like his father, but more like a perverted master. He deeply felt that his father was too eager for quick success. It was as if he wanted to squeeze all the knowledge into his little brain in a very short time. It was a typical force-feeding education. Little Nianma was actually very dissatisfied, but he was too weak to fight against his father. Therefore, he could only follow his father's education step by step. Fortunately, although Shen Juli was very strict with his practice, he took good care of him in daily life. He made delicious food for him. Seeing that his father, a divine lord, had to personally make soup for him, little Nianma felt that his father's strictness was actually forgivable. Little Nianma was still a child. When he slept at night, he still wanted to be accompanied by someone, just like his mother. However, Shen Juli probably wanted to train his independence, so he gave him a separate hall and let him sleep alone in the hall. At first, little Nianma was not used to it. He often got up in the middle of the night and ran to his father's hall. However, the door of his father's hall was closed, and there was a wizardry barrier on it. Little Nianma used all his strength to open it, but he could not. He was so anxious that he hit and scratched outside and cried. However, it was useless on Shen Juli. He cried until his voice was hoarse, but his father would not open the door for him. He could only sob and go back to his big bed to sleep. Strangely, no matter how hoarse his voice was, it could be recovered the next day. His voice was as clear as a lark. Sometimes, in a daze, he seemed to feel that his father was sitting beside him. One of his hands was rubbing his soft hair, as if he was looking at him and protecting him. It made him feel very warm and cozy. He wanted to open his eyes to take a look, but he couldn't, so he fell asleep again. When he woke up, he could not find any trace of his father's presence. Therefore, little Nianma thought that he must be dreaming. It was precisely because of Shen Juli's strict education that little Nianma seemed to have been reborn in the past 3 months. He had become more responsible and cunning. Naturally, little Nianma missed his mother very much. More than once, he talked about it in front of Shen Juli, and Shen Juli promised him that he would be able to look for his mother once he awakened the 8 mythological beasts. This condition was like a cardiac stimulant. Little Nianma practiced diligently, as if he had been injected with chicken blood. Shinjuli did not have to worry about him anymore. The 8 mythological beasts required special skills to be awakened. Therefore, when little Nianma was able to awaken all the mythological beasts, his kung fu must have reached a certain level. Ordinary people couldn't even get close to him. Therefore, when little Nianma awakened and tamed the last mythical beast, Shinjuli finally gave him a long vacation. He gave him a month's time to reunite with his mother. This was all little Nianma's experience in the past 3 months. Along the way, little Nianma told Gu Shijiu everything that had happened to him. He was so happy that he told her everything that had happened to him. The focus of interest of a little boy was naturally different from that of an adult. Chapter 1688. The little boy's interests were naturally different from the adults. He focused on the exciting experience of taming the mythological beasts. Among the 8 mythological beasts, Xiongqi was the most humane and honest one. Therefore, when Shin Nianma woke it up, it immediately recognized him as its master, and did not give him any problems. However, the other mythological beasts were not so obedient. After they were awakened, a few of them were not convinced at all, and even gave him problems. Fortunately, Shen Nianma was smart and gradually learned from the experience. Finally, he gradually tamed these mythological beasts, and made them his most powerful guards. The little thing was very talkative. He kept talking in front of Imo. Imo held his hand, and walked leisurely on the street while listening to him talk. Suddenly, she felt that it was very warm. The only person she missed these days was little Nianma. Now he was finally by her side. He was so lively and cute. Logically speaking, she should be very satisfied. However, she did not know why she felt a little lost in her heart, as if something was missing. Mother, father allowed me to stay with you for a month. Little Nianma's eyes were curved. Obviously, he was very happy. Imo looked at him and finally could not help but say, "You are so young. How can father allow you to fly across so many levels by yourself? Aren't you afraid of getting lost on the way?" That person was too irresponsible. Her Emo Palace was on the 3rd level, but Fantion Palace was on the 36th level. The distance was thousands of mountains and rivers. When she went to Fantion Palace, she could not get there so quickly if she did not use a very special space travel method. The special space travel method required a very strong telekinesis to be realized. It was absolutely impossible to do without the power of level 3 of the heaven level. Although little Nianma was the son of God, and was born with amazing telekinesis, he had only reached level 9 of the earth level. Although he was riding on Hun Dun, the power of the mount generally depended on the master's telekinesis. In other words, the level of the master's telekinesis was proportional to the power of the mount. Although Hun Dun was a mythological beast, its current power was only 20% to 30%. After all, it had just been awakened, and its blood was not completely flowing. The power of the mythological beast was also greatly reduced. Little Nianma rode on Hun Dun for a long and bumpy journey to get here. Every level of heaven had some uncertain variables and unseen difficulties. Was it really not dangerous for such a young child to travel alone? Shinjili was too lax. Amo's heart was filled with dissatisfaction. His tone was filled with anger and condemnation. Little Nianma did not take it to heart. "It's all right, mother. My kung fu is quite good now. The scenery along the way was not bad, and we did not encounter any danger. I wanted my father to come along as well, so that he could visit my mother. However, he said that the single plank bridge and the broad road were different. He also said that he needed to practice his kung fu, so he asked Nianma to come alone." "IMO," she sneered in her heart. It seemed like that person had remembered the words she said before she left. From the looks of it, he had finally given up and stopped bothering her. Then she could finally be at ease. She did not have to worry that he would use little Nianma as a link to get entangled with her. This man was indeed the Divine Lord. She seemed to be relieved. "Let's go, Nianma. Mother will bring you to a good meal." Chapter 1689. It was a restaurant. It was lunchtime, and there were many people in the restaurant. This restaurant was different from what Imo remembered. She remembered that there were private rooms on the second floor of a high-end restaurant. However, when she held Nianma's hand and walked up the stairs, she realized that it was still a hall. There were rows of tables and chairs in the hall. It was not different from the first floor, and there were still many customers. Imo frowned slightly. She only wanted to be alone with her son now. She raised her hand to call the waiter, and asked for a private room. The waiter was confused. "Sir, what is a private room?" Imo's veins on her forehead twitched, and she had to teach him about private rooms. The waiter shook his head like a rattle drum. "Sir, there is no such thing as a private room in the Qinghua Kingdom. We treat all customers equally. It is the same for any restaurant." He then looked at Imo from head to toe. "Sir, you are not from the Qinghua Kingdom, are you?" At this moment, Imo did not want to be too conspicuous, so she used a spell on herself and Nianma to hide their true appearances. Now, what appeared in front of the public was only an ordinary beauty and a beautiful boy. They did not look any different from the ordinary people here. Imo rubbed her eyebrows and waved her hand. "Forget it. Find us a more secluded table." It was easy to find a secluded table, because the people of the Qinghua Kingdom liked to show off. They liked to sit in places where there were many people. Therefore, a secluded table would always be the last to be occupied, unless there was a special situation. The waiter brought the menu, and Imo let little Nianma order. Today the little guy was the apple of her eye. Everything was based on his happiness. Little Nianma did not hesitate, and ordered a lot of delicacies. Needless to say, the little guy was very considerate. He ordered a few dishes that Imo liked. Imo realized that little Nianma had become more sensible. When they were about to sit, the little guy not only pulled out a chair for her in advance, but also used a cleaning spell to clean everything before letting his mother sit. When they were eating, he even put the dishes that she liked to eat closer to her. Imo could not help but smile when she saw how busy he was. She raised her hand and patted his head. "Nianma, I should be the one taking care of you now. No, my father taught me that a man is born to take care of a woman, especially the woman closest to him. Therefore, I should take care of my mother. The woman closest to me is my mother." The chopsticks in Imo's hand paused. He did not expect the supreme divinity to be such a sentimental person. She looked at the dishes on the table, and realized that most of them were her favorites. It seemed that little Nianma's taste was similar to hers. She tasted a few mouthfuls, and felt that although the appearance of the dish was not bad, the taste did not seem right. Little Nianma frowned after a few mouthfuls of food. "The food here is far from what my father used to cook. Every time he tasted something, he would comment on it. For example, this one was too salty, that one was too bland, and this one had too much seasoning." Imo looked at the dishes that little Nianma had tasted. They were all her favorite dishes. Looking at little Nianma's situation, it seemed that when he was in the Fantian Palace, Shunjuli often cooked these dishes for him. She was absent-minded, and recalled the days when Shunjuli first came to the Mo Palace. In addition to sending her flowers, he also showed off his cooking skills several times, and made several kinds of delicacies for her. Chapter 1690. She tried her best to embarrass him and drive him away. Not only did she throw away the flowers that he gave her, but she also threw away the dishes that he cooked. She did not even try them. Later, he probably knew that it was useless to cook for her, so he did not cook for her anymore. Judging from little Nianma's reaction, the dishes that Shunjuli cooked were quite delicious. Could it be better than the chefs in Mo Palace? Of course, this thought only flashed through Imo's mind, and she did not take it to heart. Since she did not like it, she would just eat less. "By the way, mother, you are very familiar with the layout of the restaurant. Have you been here before?" Imo was slightly stunned. Ever since she came to this continent, she had never been to the human world. However, she seemed to be born with some of the rules and layout of the human world. Needless to say, it was related to her reincarnation. After all, when she was reincarnated as Ning Xuema, she was 100% human. She had sealed that part of her memory, But she did not expect that some of the habits in her bones had not been completely forgotten. Hence it became an instinct. She smiled and did not answer her son. Instead, she peeled an egg for him to stop him from continuing to ask. Lu'er, I heard that Mount Jiai in the south of the city has been smoking recently. The smoke is very strange. Is it purple? Yes, it is indeed smoking. The smoke is coming out in a circle. The shape is quite beautiful. Why do you think it is smoking? How would I know? I only saw it from afar. There were two new guests sitting at the table next to them. They were talking about the latest gossip. A smoking mountain. Could it be that the volcano was about to erupt? This was the first thought that came to Amo's mind. She was also a little puzzled. Had the people here not heard of active volcanoes? She did not know how far Mount Jiai was from the city. If it was very close, she was afraid that the people in the city would be affected. Uncles, is Mount Jiai far from here? Little Nianma, who was sitting next to them, asked. It is not far. It is only about 40 to 50 miles away. One of them answered. Little guy, the mountain is a bit dangerous. It is not a place where people can go. The other person also spoke, but he suddenly stopped. And where did they go? The mother and daughter at the table had disappeared, leaving only a silver ingot on the table as payment for the meal. Mount Jiai wasn't very tall. It was only about 300 to 400 zhang tall. However, the mountain range was vast and winding, with no end in sight. The main peak was shaped like Mount Fuji. It was conical, and looked like a typical volcano. This volcano probably hadn't erupted for tens of thousands, or hundreds of thousands of years. The surrounding vegetation was abnormally lush. There were many trees on the mountain, and some of them were even ancient living fossils. For example, some of them were extremely thick and old. Even if a dozen people held hands, they might not be able to encircle all of them. The people in this country were probably very lazy, or perhaps they had a strong environmental awareness. Basically, no one touched the vegetation in the mountains. They were all growing in their original state. Deep in the mountains and dense forests, there were bound to be all kinds of animals, and this place was no exception. From time to time, the figures of animals would flash by in the forest. Imo and Shen Nianma rode on Hun Dun's back and hovered in the air. They looked down at the mountain below. Indeed, there were plumes of purple smoke rising from the mountaintop, just as that person had described. Every wisp of purple smoke rose in a spiral, thin at the bottom and thick at the top. From afar, it looked like a purple mushroom cloud. Plumes of smoke rose from the 8 directions of the mountain, looking like erected totem poles. Chapter 1691. It did not look like a volcano was about to erupt. The smoke did not look like it either. Imo frowned and stared at the purple smoke. She had a very strong sixth sense. At this moment, when she saw the smoke column, she faintly felt that something was not right. Shen Nianma also pursed his lips. It is not a volcano eruption. I thought I could take the opportunity to practice the fire spell here. The magma during the volcanic eruption contained a very high amount of energy. If he used this energy to practice, he could achieve twice the result with half the effort. His father had told him about some of the symptoms before the volcanic eruption, but it was completely different from what he saw. However, what was this purple smoke? It looked very strange. Shen Nianma was at the age where he was not afraid of tigers. He was very curious by nature. He pulled Amo's sleeve. Mother, shall we go down and take a look? Imo looked at the purple smoke. It was so bright, but it gave a very gloomy feeling. It was as if something terrible was hidden in it. However, she looked at the smoke for a long time. Her eyes were like X-rays as she looked at the smoke back and forth several times. She did not find anything hidden in it. It was just pure smoke. After the smoke rose into the sky, it slowly spread around and covered a small part of the forest. She took a closer look at the forest again. The forest was still lush with leaves, and the animals didn't run out in a panic either. It seemed that the smoke was just an ordinary cloud. There was nothing wrong with it. No matter what era it was, animals living in the forest were the most sensitive. They could always accurately detect danger in time, and quickly respond before the danger came. Now that the animals did not show any signs of anxiety, did it mean that the purple smoke was actually not dangerous? Mother. Shin Nianma tugged at her sleeve. Okay, let's go down. However, when we go down, you have to listen to everything I say. Don't run around, and don't make your own decisions. Amo's voice was unprecedentedly strict. Okay, I won't run around. Shin Nianma promised. Imo waved her hand, and let Shin Nianma command Hun Dun to fly down. Although Imo was straightforward, she was still very cautious when the enemy's situation was unknown. She and Shin Nianma did not directly rush into the purple smoke. Instead, they landed on the periphery of the forest that was shrouded in purple smoke. After landing, he realized that the trees here were extremely tall, and there were thorns and vines between the trees. There were no traces of human activity at all. The weeds were about 5 feet tall. Shin Nianma was buried in the weeds as soon as he landed. Not even his shadow could be found. Mother, what are we doing here? Little Nianma pushed the weeds in front of him away, and looked at the forest with difficulty. Observe, Imo answered him with 2 words. She pondered for a moment and added, Nianma, don't be reckless no matter what. You have to observe the situation first before you decide what to do. Don't just rush in and do it recklessly. This way, you won't be at a disadvantage and take the wrong path. She took the opportunity to educate him. Yes, Shin Nianma nodded, and looked at his mother with his big eyes. Mother, you know so much. Imo rubbed his head again, but a strange look flashed through his eyes. This knowledge was obviously not summed up when she was a devil lord. It was as if it came from her bones. Once she encountered a situation, she would naturally have this kind of reaction. Imo grabbed his hand. I'll take you in. Chapter 1692. Both mother and daughter stepped on the dead branches and leaves as they moved forward. Both of them were highly skilled in kung fu. Although there were many thorns in the forest, it was not a problem for them. They were basically gliding on the grass. Imo obviously had a lot of experience in surviving in the wild. Whether it was the way to pick the thorns or the way to move forward, she was very professional. She did not even use any psychokinesis. She only relied on her qing gong to get rid of all the obstacles easily. Her every move was clean and neat. Shin Nianma's eyes were shining with excitement. He liked his mother like this. In the past, his mother always had a gloomy aura, which was a little scary. Now the gloomy aura seemed to be gradually disappearing. His mother now looked more like the mother in his father's painting. His mother used to be indifferent to everything, but now she began to care about the people. More than once, he had heard from his father about some of the things his mother had done. He knew that she used to be cold on the outside but warm on the inside. She was willing to sacrifice herself for her friends. Although she used to be a good-for-nothing, she worked hard to improve herself. She didn't shrink back in the face of any difficulties. To be honest, he liked his mother, who was full of vitality and a sense of justice. Now his mother seemed to have finally begun to return. When his mother heard the conversation between the two people, she thought that a volcano was about to erupt. Therefore, she did not even think about it, and brought him along to see what was going on. While little Nianma was lost in his thoughts, his mother suddenly pulled him to hide behind a tree. There was a noise in the depths of the forest. First, a deer rushed out, and then a bear was chasing after it. It was a very ordinary scene of wild animals hunting for food. There was nothing special about it. Little Nianma yawned and looked at his mother, only to find that Imo was staring at the two beasts. She frowned slightly, and seemed to have found something wrong. Therefore, little Nianma turned around to take a look again. His eyes widened with interest. At a time of life and death, even a rabbit would bite, let alone a deer. The deer was probably anxious because it turned around and hit the bear like a small cannonball. The deer and the bear were fighting there. Look at their eyes. Amo's voice came into little Nianma's ears. Sure enough, little Nianma looked at the eyes of the two beasts. They all had purple eyes. That purple color looked dazzling, but it was filled with an aura of death. The white of the eyes and the eyeballs could not be seen. They had completely merged into one. What happened next was even stranger. The bear was strong and had sharp teeth. No matter how hard the deer tried, it was no match for it. Soon its neck was bitten off. Logically speaking, at this point, the deer should be dead, But unexpectedly, it was still kicking its four hooves. Its severed head was even trying to jump up and bite the bear's ear. It was too strange. Little Nianma widened his eyes in surprise. The beast in the human world was too strong. Beside him, Imo had a thought and pinched his fingers. A tree branch shot out and pierced through the bear's head. The bear howled in pain. Even though its head was pierced, it did not die. Instead, it charged towards the back of the tree. Hun Dun, who had been hiding beside little Nianma, rushed forward excitedly and was about to reveal its true form. Little Nianma grabbed its tail. "Don't eat it. This bear is weird." Imo patted little Nianma's head to show his appreciation. Then he threw out countless branches. Chapter 1693. The great devil's hidden weapon was not something that the bear could avoid. In the blink of an eye, the bear was pierced like a hedgehog. All the major acupuncture points on its body were full of branches. If it were an ordinary bear, it would have died long ago. However, the bear was very strong and did not want to fall. Like an oversized green hedgehog, it rushed to Imo and opened its mouth to bite her. The deer's head was still hanging on its ear, and the deer's mouth was still biting it. Imo swung her sword, and the bear's head flew away. The bear was the same as the deer. Its head was separated from its body, but it still stared at its enemy. The bear's head jumped on the ground a few times, and it still wanted to bite Imo. Imo frowned. "Rest." She raised her hand, and a red light was emitted. The bear and the deer disappeared. "Mother, what is going on?" Little Nianma was frightened. He was not afraid of the bear, but he was frightened by its desperate spirit. "This purple smoke is strange." Imo raised her hand and covered her son and the chaos with a wizardry barrier. "Follow me closely. I will check again." Imo was naturally fast. She quickly checked the inside and outside of the jungle with her son and found a very serious problem. In the places where the purple smoke covered, the animals had mutated. They had purple eyes, were fierce, and were bloodthirsty. Even if they were beheaded, they would still stare at their enemy. In the places where the purple smoke did not cover, the animals were normal, and there was nothing wrong with them. After careful observation, she found that even the plants in the places where the purple smoke covered had mutated. Strands of purple were extending down from the top of the canopy. The trees were also much taller than the trees in other places. It seemed that their growth rate had increased. If animals and plants were like this, what about people? Just as Imo was thinking about this, she saw two people running out from the depths of the jungle. Both of them were dressed as Taoist priests. It seemed that they had heard the news about the purple smoke and came to check it out. One of them was obviously affected by the purple smoke. His eyes were dark purple, and the eyeballs were not visible. The way he ran was like a zombie. He jumped a few feet, and he was chasing the other one. The other one, on the other hand, was quite normal. He was being chased around like a pig and a wolf, and he was on the verge of tears. Senior brother, wake up, don't chase me." The purple-eyed man's martial arts were obviously very high. He stretched out his mutated hand and finally grabbed the crying man. He pulled him into his embrace and opened his mouth to bite him. Whoosh! A white light shot out, shooting at the crazy purple-eyed man. He was pushed back a few steps. Suddenly, he raised his eyes and looked at Shen Nianma, who had just released the white light. Shen Nianma could not help but feel a chill down his spine. The purple-eyed man let go of his junior brother and rushed toward little Nianma. Little Nianma was not really afraid. His little hand emitted a white light and flew toward the purple-eyed man. This was not a killing move, but a move that his father had taught him to expel evil energy. Although the power of his technique was not as great as that of Shen Juli's, the power of this technique was not small. His father said that even if someone was poisoned by the zombie poison, this method could be used to expel it, and it worked every time. However, this time, he had already shot 6 or 7 times, but the man's eyes were still purple. He was almost caught by him. Imo raised her hand, and a red light wrapped around the man. In an instant, it was as if he was shackled. The man was tightly bound by the red light, and could no longer move. Chapter 1694. Imo raised her hand. An array of red light wrapped around the man. In an instant, the man was shackled by the red light and could no longer move. Imo raised her hand and rubbed Shen Yinma's head. Good boy. Try it on him slowly. Therefore, Shen Yinma happily tried all kinds of detoxification methods on the man. That junior brother breathed a sigh of relief and cupped his hands towards Imo. Thank you for your help, Mississippi. Please do save my senior brother. He is a good person who has always taken it upon himself to subdue demons and devils. Imo interrupted him. What is going on? How did he get poisoned? The junior told her what happened. They were from a cultivation sect and were passing by this place. When they saw the strange purple smoke, they flew over with their swords to see what kind of demon was behind it. They were also afraid of being poisoned, so they used an anti-poison spell before entering the forest. However, it did not work. Not long after they entered the forest, the senior who had been walking in front suddenly stopped. He patted his senior's shoulder in surprise and wanted to ask him what was going on. He did not expect his senior to become like this and chase after him with a pair of purple eyes. The junior briefly told the story and continued to beg Imo. In order to impress her, he kept talking about his senior's past deeds of killing demons. In Imo's ears, she felt that this senior was like a reincarnated Fahai. Whenever he saw a demon, it was as if he saw a mortal enemy. Whether it was evil or not, he would kill it. The junior kept talking, but Imo's pretty face was getting colder and colder. That junior brother seemed to have sensed something amiss as he spoke, and finally shut his mouth. Imo slowly dusted her sleeves. Do you know who I am? You are? The junior had a bad feeling in his heart. Devil Master. Imo chuckled. This senior brother of yours has killed quite a few of my people. The man's face changed drastically and took a few steps back. You. Imo looked at him gently. Tell me, how many have you killed? As many as your senior? No. The man was obviously a little flustered. Imo smiled gently again. You're not allowed to lie. If you do, I'll punish you even more harshly. The man's face turned green and white for a while. Suddenly, he puffed out his chest and said, I admit that I've killed 3 evildoers. It's not that I'm not capable enough. It's just that I'm too soft-hearted. I can't bear to kill anyone who isn't evil. Senior Marshal Brother often says that I'm too soft-hearted. Imo sized him up. This person was indeed soft-hearted. His senior brother had almost bitten him to death, but he couldn't bear to slap him. That junior Marshal Brother looked as if he was going to throw caution to the wind. Did you release this strange purple smoke? Do you want to turn the human world into a purgatory? This person's imagination was really rich. Was he brainwashed by his senior brother? He drew his sword and pointed it at Imo today. Even if I die, I will. Before he could finish speaking, he felt a sudden heat in his hand. The sword had actually melted in an instant. If he hadn't pulled back in time, he probably wouldn't have been able to keep one of his hands. Imo's voice was indifferent. You're not even qualified to fight me. You can scram now. There's a city 60 miles ahead. Tell the magistrate there to quickly evacuate the people. The man was stunned. He didn't expect that she would let him go so easily. Moreover, from her words, it was obvious that she wasn't the one who released the purple smoke. He couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. Then what about my senior marshal brother? Imo asked him back. Is your senior marshal brother more important, or the safety of the people in the city more important? Chapter 1695. Imo asked him back. Is your senior brother more important than the safety of the people in the city? That one sentence caused that person's face to turn green and white. Gritting his teeth, he steeled his heart and rode his sword away. On the other side, Shen Yinma had already tried more than a dozen methods on his senior, but none of them worked. Mother, is it because I am not good enough? After all, it was Shen Yinma's first time, so he could not figure out his own strength. Imo looked at the few methods that Shen Yinma used to exorcise evil spirits, and realized that she could do it too. Therefore, she also cast a spell, and a ball of blazing white light directly shrouded the man. Shen Yinma exclaimed happily. Mother, you can do it too. The white light that she emitted was certainly different from Shin Yinma's. It was extremely powerful, almost as powerful as Shin Juli's. Shin Yinma was very satisfied and waited for the man to recover. He did not expect that after the white light disappeared, the man was still the same. His strength had increased a lot. He struggled to break the red light that trapped him, and repeatedly showed his newly grown fangs to Shin Yinma. He is hopeless. Aemo did not want to waste any more energy on the man. She directly cast a red light, and the man immediately turned into dust and disappeared. Shin Yinma frowned. Mother, it seems that he is hopeless after being poisoned by this poisonous smoke. What should we do? If the smoke continues to spread, I don't know how many creatures will be affected. Aemo also rubbed her eyebrows. It was like a bird flu virus. Animals and humans could not survive if they inhaled it. She was afraid that other species would not be able to survive if they encountered it. The reason why she spent so much energy on the senior brother was to experiment on him, to see if there was a way to save him. Now it seemed that there was no way. She took out her directed audio spell and contacted Shuailan. Without waiting for him to greet her, she directly briefed him about the situation and asked him to quickly order the nearby demons to move away. Shuailan was worried about her safety. Momo, don't act rashly. I will be there soon. There's no need for that. Just give the order. Aemo didn't wait for Shuailan to speak any more nonsense and turned off the voice transmission talisman. Let's go to the place where the smoke is coming from. He flew out of the forest and headed straight for the top of the mountain. She also knew that the purple smoke was extremely dangerous, so she did not want the child to be in danger. Therefore, she asked Chaos to stop Shin Yinma in the air and told him not to be attacked by the purple smoke. He should not run around and stay within her sight. Shin Yinma also knew that he should not cause any more trouble for his mother, so he nodded in agreement. Mother, be careful. I will. I'll be right back. Aemo swooped down. She planned to take a look first before making a decision. She dared to set up a protective shield around her body. Then, she ran towards the place where the purple smoke was coming from. Her body disappeared into the purple smoke. Shin Yinma only hated that he was still too inexperienced and too weak. He could not fight side by side with his mother. Now he could only watch helplessly. Chaos was very protective of its little master. It had been carrying its little master in circles in the air. It could not leave the place, but it could not be attacked by the purple smoke. 10 minutes passed. A quarter of an hour passed, an hour passed, 2 hours passed. Time passed by as Shin Yinma waited anxiously. As for the little things that happened between Shin Yinma and his mother, there was no need to tell him. Shin Yinma also knew that it was a taboo to be disturbed during a closed-door practice. Otherwise, it would be easy to go crazy. Especially recently, his father did not look too good. He really needed to meditate to recover. Father had said that this voice transmission talisman could only be used once. Therefore, Shin Yinma did not dare to answer this special directed audio spell. However, now that his mother had such an accident, he could only ask for help from his father. Blood dripped from his fingertips. He used a special method to activate the directed audio spell. The spell flashed, but it was not connected. Shin Yinma's heart almost jumped out of his throat. Did something happen to his father? Or was he at a critical moment in his cultivation and could not answer? Chapter 1697. Father, please pick me up. For Shin Yinma, 1 second felt as long as a century. Fortunately, after half a minute, the directed audio spell finally turned completely golden, and his father's voice was heard. Yinma, what's the matter? His voice was slightly hoarse, but it was still clear. Shin Yinma almost cried out loud. He tried his best to calm himself down. Father, mother and I came to the human world to play. We saw a strange purple smoke in Jiai Mountain in the Qinghua Kingdom. Although Shen Yinma's voice was slightly trembling, his expression was very clear. He had the time, place, and incident. In the end, his voice finally sounded like he was about to cry. Father, can you come and save my mother? I am really worried. I want to go down and have a look. Your mother's life is not in danger. Stay there and don't act rashly. I will be there soon. Shen Juli's voice was clear and low, as if to reassure Shen Nianma. The golden directed audio spell was extinguished. It burned in Shen Nianma's hand and turned into ashes. His mother's life was not in danger? Shen Nianma caught this sentence in time, and finally breathed a sigh of relief. Then he was a little puzzled. His father had not seen the actual situation here. How did he know that his mother's life was not in danger? Was it a prediction? Another hour passed. In this hour, Shen Nianma did not stop calling. Of course, he did not get any response. If it were not for his father's words, he was afraid that he would have rushed down regardless of the consequences. While he was riding on chaos, a white light flashed in the distance, and a person appeared in front of him. Shen Nianma was stunned. He looked at the person who came, and almost could not believe his eyes. Father! It was such a long distance, but his father came so quickly. When he and his mother came here, his mother used the Devil Kingdom's flying spell, and flew for nearly 6 hours. He thought that even if his father was faster, it would take at least 4 hours. He did not expect that he would arrive in just over an hour. The person who came was Shinjuli. This time his attire was a little strange. He wore a wide light blue robe with faint silver patterns flowing on it. Perhaps he was in a hurry, so his face was a little pale. However, his eyes were still deep, and his voice was still cold. The first sentence he said was, "Nianma, your vacation is cancelled. You should go back now." Shen Nianma was stunned. "Father." He paused for a moment and finally said what he wanted to say. "Father, it is okay to cancel Nianma's leave, but Nianma wants to follow you to save mother." He was worried sick. He had to see with his own eyes that his mother was safe and sound. Shinjuli glanced at him and said, "I'll give you 2 choices. 1, go back now. Father promises to give you a mother in one piece. Secondly, Father will personally escort you back. Father will no longer care about this place. You can choose now." Shen Nianma's eyes widened. He did not expect his father to be so heartless. He burst into tears. "Father, haven't you always liked mother? How can you threaten Nianma with her safety?" Shinjuli said coldly, "Father is tired. Since we have gone our separate ways, there is no need to worry about her. This time, I am here mainly for you. Even if I go down to save her, it is also for you." Then, "Can Nianma wait here? As long as father rescues mother, I will leave immediately." Chapter 1698. Then, "Can Nianma stay here and wait? As long as father rescues mother, I will leave immediately. I will not delay. Nianma will stay here obediently, and will not cause any trouble for father." Shen Nianma still wanted to argue. Shen Juli looked at the distance, which was almost covered by the purple smoke. "Shen Nianma, are you sure you want to bargain with father here? Father does not care. Anyway, the person who is trapped is not important to father. It is not a big deal to let her suffer a little more." Shen Nianma was speechless. At this time, he had to choose to leave even if he was unwilling. Han Dun carried Shen Nianma and flew away. In the blink of an eye, they disappeared into the sky. Shen Juli looked at his son's back. There was a flash of sadness in his eyes. Shen Nianma was still young. There was no use for him to stay here. He would only distract his parents. At this time, he did not have the energy to be distracted anymore. He had brought all the 8 mythological beasts out, but they were not as fast as him. They were still on their way. They would meet Nianma and escort him back to Fantian Palace. He turned around and looked at the purple smoke pillar that Imo had jumped down from. Just as he was about to jump down, he suddenly seemed to have sensed something. He slowly turned around and looked at the purple smoke ball that had closed up not far away. His gaze focused on the figure that was faintly discernible in the purple smoke ball. After a slight pause, he finally said, "So you've already come out by yourself." The figure shuttled out of the purple smoke. Her red clothes were dancing under the sunset. It was Imo who was trapped in the purple smoke. Her eyes were as bright as rubies. She looked at Shinjuli from head to toe, and looked indifferent. "Yes, I just came out not long ago." Shinjuli looked at her. He had not seen her for 3 months since they parted at Fantian Palace. At this moment, She had the appearance of a young girl. She had big round eyes and a half-smile. She was very similar to the appearance of Ning Xuema in his memory. She had been trapped in the purple smoke for so long, but he did not see any injuries on her body. Her face was slightly pale, but there was nothing wrong with her. She was actually able to escape from the 8-directional violet fiend formation by herself. It seemed like her kung fu had improved enough. The two of them stood facing each other. Their once loving and undying feelings seemed to have vanished into thin air. She looked at him like she was looking at a stranger. Shen Juli turned his eyes away and looked at the purple smoke. It is good that you are fine. Nianma is very worried about you. You can use your directed audio spell to tell him that you are safe. Imo smirked. You don't have to tell me that. She took out her directed audio spell and connected to Shen Nianma. Shen Nianma could not believe his ears when he heard Imo's voice. Mother, is it really you? It's the real deal. Imo comforted him. You can rest assured now. Go back to your Fantian palace first. Mother will take you out when things are done here. Shen Nianma happily agreed, but the happiness came too quickly. He still could not believe it. Well, did my father deliberately change my mother's voice to fool me? Imo faintly glanced at Shen Juli, who was not far away, and answered her son. Of course not. Stupid son. Didn't you realize that the directed audio spell that called you is only used between mother and son? Shen Nianma seemed to have finally realized it and let go of his doubts. Chapter 1699. He was still puzzled. Mother, why were you gone for so long? You said that you would be back soon. Well, there is an array there, and it is not easy to break. I am actually very anxious. Well, I still have something to do. You can go back first. After the directed audio spell ended, Shen Nianma finally went back with satisfaction. Imo put away the directed audio spell. When she looked up, her eyes met with Shen Juli's. Both of them looked at each other in the air. Imo's eyes were cold. Shen Juli looked away. His voice was also cold. This is the purple evil array. Once it is activated, all 6 realms will be in trouble. It will become a real hell. This array has been activated once 50,000 years ago, and all 6 realms were poisoned. This time, if we want to seal it again, we must work together with the immortals and devils. I have already informed the Emperor Immortal and Mingdi. They should be here soon. Devil Master, please inform the Monster Kingdom. Momo. A voice came from afar and interrupted Shen Juli's words. Then, a red light came from afar and arrived in front of them in the blink of an eye. This person was Shui Yilan. He did not even look at Shen Juli, who was standing aside. His eyes fell directly on Imo, and then he heaved a sigh of relief. Momo, fortunately you are fine. He looked again at Imo's face and frowned slightly. Momo, you don't look very good. Are you hurt? His concern was obvious. I am fine. This thing can't trap me. Imo came closer to Shui Yilan. Shui Yilan, you are here at the right time. Shui Yilan's eyes were slightly brightened. This time, he faintly felt that Imo seemed to treat him differently. He glanced at Shen Juli, who was not far away. Shen Juli did not look at him at all. He seemed to be engrossed in the purple smoke below. Did you miss me? Shui Yilan was half joking and half serious. He tentatively stretched out his arm and gently hugged her waist. Imo didn't hide. Instead, she leaned her head on his shoulder. There's probably going to be a tough battle later. Let me lean on you first. Shui Yilan's heart skipped a beat. He couldn't believe his good luck. He hugged her even tighter. It's okay. You should rest first. He simply sat down on the cloud and let her lean in his arms. Imo seemed to be really tired. She yawned. Shui Yilan, did you bring anything to eat? Shui Yilan was stunned. What do you want to eat? I'll get it for you. Imo pursed her lips in dissatisfaction. When you were by my side, you always carried my favorite food with you. Shui Yilan's heart trembled as he looked down at her. Momo, you remember our past? She recovered her memories. Imo didn't answer him. She only closed her eyes and muttered, so hungry. Shui Yilan was really conflicted. When she was still Shui Imo, the two of them depended on each other for survival. He spoiled her and knew that she liked to eat, so he always brought all kinds of food with him. He even learned how to cook, so he fed her until she was full at any time. After his rebirth, although the two of them had met a few times, Imo had always been cold to him. She had never asked for anything from him, so he had changed his habit of carrying food with him. Right now, let alone good food, he couldn't even find a piece of steamed bun. He really wanted to find food for her, but he couldn't bear to give up this opportunity to hug a beauty. God knows how long he had been waiting for this opportunity. Chapter 1700. Just as he was feeling conflicted, a hand suddenly reached over. In the palm was a plate of exquisite pastries. Looking up the light blue sleeve, he saw Shenjuli's expressionless face. Eat this. It'll replenish your strength. Imo looked up at him and pushed his hand away. She yawned lazily. I don't want to eat your food. She then turned to Shuilan. I remember that you're good at roasting game? Shuilan looked down at the forest below, and his eyes lit up. Okay, I'll take you down there to roast game. He half-hugged Imo's waist and rushed down to a place not covered by the purple smoke. In the blink of an eye, they disappeared into the dense forest. Shenjuli slowly retracted his hand. The pastry in his palm was still steaming, and the sweet aroma lingered in the air. It was the most successful pastry he had ever made, and no one would want to eat it anymore. This was good. He slowly raised his hand, and the pastry in his palm turned into powder. When the wind blew, the powder disappeared without a trace. He slowly sat on the cloud and lowered his eyes to meditate. A bonfire. A pheasant was about to be roasted over the bonfire. The golden skin was covered in oil, and the aroma assailed his nostrils. Shuilan looked at Imo, who was sleeping next to him, and then looked up at the sky in the distance. Shenjuli saw him and Imo being so intimate, but he didn't react or chase after them. Did he really give up and let go? After the pheasant was roasted, he spun it around in his hand. The piping hot pheasant was already at the right temperature. He gently patted Imo awake and handed the pheasant to her. Imo's eyes lit up as she took it. It seemed that she was really hungry. Like a hurricane, the pheasant was reduced to a pile of bones in a moment. Shuilan's lips twitched. His Momo's appetite had grown. At this time, the sky was completely dark. Under the light of the bonfire, Imo's eyes were shining. After finishing the pheasant, she still wanted more. Shuilan, roast more. Momo, are you still hungry? Imo shook his head. In fact, she felt a little bloated. However, there was a space in her chest that she always felt a little empty. No matter how much she stuffed, it would not be able to fill it. Thus, Shuilan began to roast things again. Hunting was very easy for him now. He didn't need to get up. All he had to do was blow a whistle, and all kinds of small animals would automatically come to him. Shuilan casually picked out a few small and plump breeds with fresh meat. He butchered them and roasted them one by one. He intended to show off his ability in front of her, and naturally did his best to do it in the most beautiful way possible. Momo, what is this purple smoke? Imo was gnawing on a rabbit leg. She looked up at the sky and shook her head. I've never seen it before, but that supreme divinity should know. He should be able to explain it to everyone when they're all here. Shuilan's eyes moved slightly. He was not very interested in the purple smoke, but he was interested in what Imo had just said. These days, when Imo occasionally mentioned Shenjuli to him, she would call him by his name and talk about how good Shenjuli was. This time, however, she directly called him by his identity. The sense of unfamiliarity was obvious in her words. What happened between her and Shenjuli? How did they come to this point? Shuilan did not dare to ask directly, for fear of offending her. He chose the safest question. Momo, are the three of you traveling together? By the way, where is little Nianmo? You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.